The first time I realized something was wrong, I was already staring at the screen and couldn't look away. That moment didn't feel exciting or mysterious. It felt heavy, like my body understood something my head refused to accept. I had always been curious about things people warned others not to touch. Not because I felt special, but because I hated not knowing. If something existed, I needed proof. That habit followed me into adulthood, especially during nights when I stayed awake watching YouTube videos about obscure parts of the internet. I didn't talk about it with my friends or family. Those videos became something private, something I watched with headphones on, replaying details and comments. The deep web wasn't presented as fantasy there, but as structure, a system that rewarded patience and obsession. What caught my attention the most was red rooms. Not because of the violence, but because nobody could prove they were real. I didn't want horror. I wanted confirmation. I started slowly using basic tools that anyone could find with enough searching. Most nights ended the same way, with blank pages and dead links that led nowhere. That didn't frustrate me because it matched what the videos explained. Real things were hidden behind repetition and time. I found black markets, forums, and video directories that felt wrong but unimpressive. Everything looked transactional and cold. I never interacted with anyone. I stayed invisible, just observing, telling myself that was enough. Red rooms never appeared. Weeks passed without a trace, and part of me started thinking they were just another myth recycled for views. Still, I kept searching, night after night, following the same routine. Then one night, a red room appeared at the top of an empty page. It didn't load or animate. Before clicking anything, I sat back and tried to calm my breathing because my body reacted faster than my thoughts. My heart wasn't racing, but there was pressure in my chest that didn't fade. I checked the room, the door, the window, even though it made no sense. The red room asked a simple question about entering. No explanation followed, and that made it worse. I clicked yes, expecting something dramatic, but the same question appeared again, identical in every way. I hesitated, then clicked yes once more. The repetition started to bother me, not because it felt fake, but because it felt deliberate. Every time I answered, the page refreshed instantly, as if someone was waiting for that response. I told myself I could stop any time, but I didn't. When the room finally disappeared, nothing replaced it. No loading screen, no confirmation. I waited, staring at the screen until my eyes hurt, then shut the laptop and went to bed without sleeping. The next evening, when someone knocked on my door, I didn't know if it was influenced by my experience yesterday, but I was a little worried. I stayed quiet for several seconds, standing close enough to hear movement outside. A voice said my name and mentioned a delivery. It sounded normal, but my hands tightened around the door handle anyway. The moment I opened the door, everything collapsed into chaos. Hands grabbed my arms with force that didn't allow resistance. Another hand covered my mouth hard enough to hurt my jaw. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped. They moved fast and efficiently, like they had done this before. A hood went over my head and something solid pressed against my face, cutting off air. My wrists were pulled behind my back and secured tightly, making my shoulders burn. I was dragged into a vehicle and pushed down onto the seat. Someone kept pressure on my head while the car started moving. No one spoke, and the silence made it worse than threats ever could. I lost track of time as the car sped through turns. Breathing became harder, slower, until everything faded out. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was the position of my body, because I couldn't move. My wrists were tied to a chair, my ankles secured, my back forced straight. Panic didn't explode immediately. It built slowly as I tested every restraint and failed. Bright lights blinded me, aimed directly at my face. I tried to look away, but my head was pulled back roughly by someone standing behind me. My vision adjusted enough to see cameras placed around the room, all pointed at me. A screen turned on in front of me, filling with usernames and numbers that kept changing. I understood what it was before my mind could deny it. This wasn't a video archive. It was live. Men moved in and out of my view, faces covered, gestures calm and methodical. One of them adjusted a camera. Another checked the screen, nodding slowly. Requests appeared on the screen, and they followed them carefully, step by step, making sure everything was visible. They waited after each action, watching reactions, adjusting angles, continuing without hesitation. My body reacted before my voice did. I cried, begged, tried to explain anything that could make this stop. Nothing changed. This wasn't punishment or revenge. It was scheduled. I couldn't believe what I was experiencing. My curiosity about red rooms led me to this place as the protagonist. I just wanted to observe, but now I am the object. They began using devices meant to control pain precisely, not to end anything quickly. One of them placed clamps on my arms and legs, tightening them until my muscles locked and my hands lost strength. Another adjusted the chair again so my feet barely touched the floor, forcing my weight onto my shoulders and lower back. Every time my body tried to shift or resist, they corrected it immediately, tightening something else, pushing me back into position so the cameras never lost sight of my face. And after that, they focused on keeping me responsive. They poured cold water over my head without warning, then left me sitting there shaking while the light stayed fixed on my eyes. When my breathing slowed, one of them struck my leg hard enough to make my body jerk, not once, but repeatedly, waiting between each hit to make sure I stayed awake. The last thing I remember clearly was my vision narrowing as the lights stayed fixed on me. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. My body felt heavy and unresponsive, and my thoughts refused to connect properly. The environment was different, quieter, but I couldn't open my eyes immediately. A voice called my name, repeating it slowly until it broke through the fog in my head. When I finally managed to focus, I saw white walls and medical equipment around me. My throat hurt when I tried to speak, and my hands were free but weak. Someone pressed a button and left the room without explaining anything. I stayed there staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together what was real and what wasn't. But my thoughts kept circling back to the cameras. My mother was sitting next to the bed when I fully woke up. She looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept properly in days. When she saw my eyes open, she held my hand tightly and didn't say anything at first. I told her everything in a rush, afraid that if I stopped talking, the memories would slip away. I described the website, the red room, the men, the room, the broadcast. I needed her to believe me. She listened calmly, then told me this wasn't the first time I had told that story. According to her, I had never lived alone, never owned a computer, and had no access to the internet. She said I had been hospitalized before after obsessing over crime cases, always convinced I had been taken somewhere. The doctors called it a recurring episode. I stopped arguing and looked away. I listened to my mother, but I didn't accept what she was saying. After she left the room, I tested my hands, my wrists, my arms, slowly checking everything. I no longer had any wounds, but I am sure that they did not all disappear. I tried to remember everything that happened in the red room, although everything is in fragments. They erased my memory. I'm sure they'll come for me again. I'm a middle-aged guy with a boring routine and a bad habit of digging where I shouldn't. After work, after dinner, after everything that passes for a normal life, I sit in front of my computer and scroll through the deep web. Not for drugs, not for weapons, mostly out of boredom. Shock pages stopped doing anything to me years ago. Most sites try too hard. Fake gore, recycled videos, loud banners screaming that this is the worst thing you'll ever see. It's all empty. It feels made for teenagers pretending to be tough. I kept digging because I wanted something different, something quieter, something that didn't need to shout. That night I found a page that looked wrong because it was calm. White background, clean layout, no music, no pop-ups, just a catalog. The title said, footwear. Nothing else. No logo, no slogan. Each item was a pair of boots. Same model. Heavy leather, worn soles. Under the picture, there was a name and an age. Like Brian 34, Lucas 41. Prices were high, but not insane. What caught my attention was the description, repeated word for word on every product. These boots were used by their respective volunteers. I stared at the screen for a long time before clicking anything. My brain kept trying to turn it into a joke. Art project, dark marketing, some edgy brand playing with ideas of consumption and bodies. But there was no explanation, no about section, no comments. I clicked on one pair. Carl, 29. The boots looked more worn than the others. The leather near the toe was scratched. The sole was uneven, like someone dragged one foot. The size matched mine. That detail bothered me more than it should have. Before buying them, I sat there, hands off the mouse, breathing slow. This was the point where curiosity usually loses to common sense. That pause stretched. The sight didn't change. No timer, no pressure, just the boots waiting. I told myself I wasn't hurting anyone by clicking buy. That whatever this was, it had already happened. I paid. The confirmation page didn't thank me. It just said, order received. 3 days later, a plain cardboard arrived at my door. No sender name, no return address. It was heavier than I expected. Before opening the box, I stood in my kitchen for a full minute, listening to the refrigerator hum and the pipes tick. Nothing else. No cars outside, no neighbors. That quiet stretched until my stomach started to feel tight. I cut the tapes and folded the flaps open. Inside were the boots, wrapped in thin paper. Under them, separated by a piece of cardboard, was a black USB drive. No label, no note, just the drive. I picked up the boot first. They smelled old. Not leather store old, used old. The tag was still attached to one lace. Carl 29. On the sole, near the heel, there were dark stains, dried, brownish. I didn't need to guess what it was. My stomach flipped and I leaned over the sink gagging. I didn't throw up yet, but it was close. I dropped the boots back into the box like they were dirty dishes and stepped away. The USB sat there small and harmless. I told myself it was probably a virus, some scam on top of a sick joke. That should have been enough to stop me. It wasn't. I plugged it into my PC. Before opening the file, I muted my speakers and lowered the lights in the room. My hands were shaking, slow and stiff like they didn't belong to me anymore. I stared at the screen for several seconds, breathing through my mouth, trying to keep my stomach under control. There was only one file. No title, no duration. I double-clicked it. A young man appeared sitting on a bare concrete floor. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. He leaned closer to the camera and spoke. "My name is Carl. I'm 29 years old." He swallowed hard before continuing. "I don't have enough money to keep my family going. I tried loans. I tried extra work. Nothing worked. This is the only option I have left." He wiped his face with his sleeve, breathing unevenly. "They told me this would be quick. They told me my family would be taken care of. Please, please don't judge me." Carl slowly laid down on the floor. His body stiffened. His breathing broke into sobs. "I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this." From the edge of the camera, legs entered the shot. A woman wearing boots, the same boots sitting in my kitchen. She stopped next to his head. Carl screamed and cried as the boot was lifted. I stopped the video before anything else happened. I ran to the sink and vomited until my throat burned. When I looked back at the box, the boots seemed closer than before. That's when I heard the knock at the door. The knock was polite. 2 taps, a pause, 2 more taps. I didn't move. My heart was slamming so hard it felt like it was pushing against my ribs. I stayed silent, standing in the middle of the kitchen, staring at the door. Another knock came, firmer this time. still calm, still patient. "Sir, we just wanted to thank you for your purchase and share a small detail with you. Those boots include a small camera in the toe. You are not the final consumer. You're simply part of the show. We appreciate your collaboration." I backed away from the door and hit the table, knocking the boots to the floor. That's when the door handle started to shake. The knocking turned into heavy hits. Someone slammed their shoulder against the door. I heard glass shatter in the living room. Another window broke. Sounds came from everywhere at once, like people were surrounding the apartment. I slid down the wall and collapsed onto the floor. My chest felt tight and useless. I couldn't stand. I couldn't think. Warmth spread in my pants and I didn't care. I just cried and waited for it to end. Then suddenly it stopped. No footsteps, no voices, just silence. I stayed on the floor for a long time after that. I didn't know how long. When I finally stood up, my legs were numb and shaky. The door was intact. The windows were broken, but nothing else was touched. The boots were still there. I didn't call the police. I didn't tell anyone. I cleaned the mess and threw the box away. I wrapped the boots in trash bags and shoved them into a closet I never used. Days passed. I didn't sleep much. Every sound made me jump. I stopped using my computer except for work. I thought maybe that was it, a warning, a scare. Then an email arrived. It thanked me again. It invited me to a show. There was a link. I stared at it for a long time before clicking. The video loaded fast. It was me, sitting on my kitchen floor, crying, shaking, wetting myself. The angle was low, close to the ground, from the boots' perspective. The comments scrolled beside the video. People laughing, people sending money, tipping, joking. I closed the browser and sat there empty. I understood then. I was never in danger. Not really. I wasn't worth that effort. I wasn't special. I was just another customer. The volunteers were the product. The rest of us were the punchline. No one came back for me. No more emails. No more knocks. Just silence and the knowledge that somewhere people paid to watch me break.
For obvious reasons, I'm not going to reveal my name, but I just want you to know that you should never accept a job without knowing exactly what you're getting yourself into. It all started when Marcus sent me a message a few years ago. I was very surprised because we hadn't seen each other since high school. We grew up together in a working-class neighborhood, but as an adult, his life changed a lot. Marcus became a professional chef and his clients were eccentric millionaires, which allowed him to live a life of luxury, but a very peculiar one. He lived alone in a large mansion far from the city. He was also isolated from everyone else, no longer speaking to his family or friends. I always believed that he contacted me because he felt lonely. He invited me to his place and welcomed me warmly. We started meeting often after that. Always at his place, always him cooking, me sitting at the table eating food that tasted too good for how quiet the room was. He worked from home and said his clients preferred it that way. No meetings, no photos, and no public face. What bothered me wasn't the secrecy, but the absence of people. No friends dropped by, no family called. When I mentioned it, he brushed it off and said distance made things simpler, though his tone didn't sound relieved. He had money, but no life around it. The house felt more like a container than a home, and the longer I stayed, the clearer it became that he had chosen this isolation himself. One afternoon, I arrived earlier than usual. The gate was open, which never happened. I stayed in the car longer than necessary, listening to nothing, feeling stupid for hesitating, and then I finally went inside. Before I even saw him, something felt wrong in a very concrete way. The house wasn't silent like before, it was empty in a heavier sense, like a place after something irreversible has already happened and nothing inside knows what to do next. I called his name while walking through the hallway, forcing my voice to sound normal, and when I reached the living area, I saw him from the ceiling beam, his body still enough to look unreal. The rope was tight, the chair beneath him was tipped over, and there was no sign that anyone else had been there. I stood there longer than makes sense, staring at his face, trying to understand how someone who cooked every day, who planned everything down to the second, could decide to stop like this. His eyes were open, and that detail locked me in place more than anything else in the room. My phone was in my pocket, and I knew exactly what I was supposed to do, but instead I sat down because my legs felt unreliable and my thoughts kept jumping to things that had nothing to do with death, like bills, overdue notices, and how much money I owed. While sitting there, I noticed his wallet on the table, thick with cash and his ID next to it. I didn't grab them right away. I stared at them, then back at him, and understood that whatever I did next was going to follow me for the rest of my life. I stayed in the house that night, not because I felt safe, but because leaving felt worse. Like walking away would make everything real in a way I wasn't ready for. I didn't sleep much, and every small sound made me sit up, expecting someone to come looking for him. The next morning, a man arrived, well-dressed, calm, polite, and clearly used to being obeyed. He asked for Marcus without hesitation, and in that moment, my fear wasn't about being caught, but about whether my voice would give me away. I used Marcus's name, and the man didn't react. He spoke about a scheduled job, a private commission, and a payment that had already been transferred. He handed me a device and explained that everything I needed was inside, including instructions and deadlines. After he left, I stood in the kitchen holding that device, aware that the house felt tighter now, less neutral, like it had accepted me but not forgiven me. When I opened the laptop and read the messages, it took time for the meaning to settle because my brain kept trying to simplify what I was seeing. The orders were clear, detailed, and impossible to misunderstand. This wasn't symbolic or implied, it was human meat, described with the same cold precision Marcus used when talking about food. I closed the laptop once, then opened it again because the money attached to those messages was already changing my decisions. Before starting, I spent hours walking around the kitchen, touching surfaces, checking drawers, trying to convince myself there was a version of this where I didn't have to fully understand what I was doing. The equipment was professional, the layout intentional, and every tool felt like it had been placed for this exact purpose. I followed the instructions step by step because thinking beyond them made my chest tighten and my breathing uneven. I focused on timing, temperature, and presentation, the same way Marcus had taught himself to focus, and I understood that this distance was the only way he survived as long as he did. The first delivery went out without issues, and the payment arrived immediately. Seeing that number on the screen didn't feel like relief. It felt like confirmation that I was already too far in to pretend this was temporary. More orders followed, closer together, each one more specific than the last. The clients had preferences and expectations, and their messages carried impatience when deadlines weren't met, as if they assumed compliance was guaranteed. Over time, it became clear that millionaire clients were contacting him through a deep website. It was a very large company dedicated to this type of culinary perversion, and it was an unstoppable business. Late one night, while cleaning the kitchen after another job, I stopped and realized the house wasn't designed to hide this work, it was designed to support it. That's when I understood Marcus hadn't been chasing money, he had been trying to survive something that kept pulling him deeper no matter how much he earned. The weight of it didn't arrive all at once. It built slowly through repetition, through routine, through the realization that stopping wasn't as simple as refusing an order. Every payment solved a problem while creating another one, and I saw clearly how Marcus had ended up alone with it. I started imagining him standing in the same place, making the same calculations, telling himself the same excuses, and I felt closer to him dead than I ever had when he was alive. The isolation wasn't accidental, it was the only way he could live with what he was doing. I finished the last order I had accepted not because I wanted to, but because stopping halfway felt more dangerous than finishing. When the next message arrived, I didn't respond, even though my hands hovered over the keyboard longer than I'd like to admit. Before leaving, I looked at the beam again and understood his choice not as weakness, but as exhaustion that had finally won. The money erased my debts quickly, but it didn't erase habits. I still wake up thinking about deadlines and precision, about doing things exactly the way they're expected to be done. I don't work anymore, and I try to come back to my life with my real name. Some nights I think about how easy it was to step into his place and how hard it has been to step out of it. I understand now why he couldn't keep going. Whatever I took from that house didn't stay there, and I know I won't ever be the same person again.
I had been staring at my brother's Facebook profile for almost an hour without realizing it, scrolling up and down the same post while my chest felt tight and my head refused to slow down. It had been a year since he died, and even after all that time, his page still felt like the only place where he existed in some form that hadn't been erased completely. The room was quiet, too quiet for a city apartment at night, and the light from the laptop was the only thing keeping the space from feeling empty. I wasn't looking for anything specific, and I wasn't expecting surprises because his profile had been frozen for months with no changes, no new activity, and no signs of life. Lauren came out the bathroom while drying her hands, stopped when she saw the screen, and let out a slow breath that sounded tired rather than annoyed. She told me I shouldn't keep doing this to myself, that going back there only made things worse. But I answered that it was the anniversary and that I just needed a few more minutes before closing everything. She looked at me for a moment, then asked if I wanted something to eat and said she would go out to get food anyway. When the door closed behind her, the apartment felt even quieter, and I finally moved the mouse to close the browser. That was when the page refreshed by itself. A new post appeared at the top of the profile without warning, without loading, and without any explanation that made sense. My eyes locked onto the image before my mind had time to react, and my body immediately pulled back from the desk. The photo showed my brother close to the camera, his face soaked in blood, his eyes wide open and fixed straight ahead as if he had been forced to stare. The blood didn't look staged or edited, and the expression on his face wasn't neutral or empty, because it carried fear and anger mixed together in a way that made my stomach twist. I checked the name, the username, the friends list, and every detail that would confirm it wasn't real, but everything matched his account exactly. Then I noticed the small green dot next to his name that said active now, and my hands started shaking so badly that I had to place them on my legs. Before I could process that, a message notification appeared on the screen. I didn't open it right away because part of me hoped it would disappear if I waited long enough. When it didn't, I clicked. "Brother, please help me, save me." My chair slid back as I stood up too fast, my heart beating hard enough to hurt. I walked to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and told myself that grief could do this, that my head was breaking under pressure. When I went back to the room, the laptop was still on. The profile picture hadn't changed. The image was closer now, and my brother's face filled most of the frame with more blood running down his skin and into his clothes. His eyes looked strained as if he had been staring without blinking for a long time, and the longer I looked, the harder it became to breathe normally. Nothing happened for several seconds, and that waiting felt worse than action because my body stayed tense and ready to react while my mind raced through possibilities. Another message arrived slowly, letter by letter. "It hurts. You left me there." I reached for the power cord and pulled it from the wall with shaking hands, watching the screen go black while my heart continued racing. I stood there holding the cable, listening to the silence, trying to calm down. The laptop turned on by itself. The startup sound felt painfully loud, and the screen lit up without asking for anything, already showing Facebook open on my brother's profile. His face was closer again, distorted and stretched, and a low sound came from the speakers that made my throat tighten. Before anything else happened, I froze in place, watched image shift as if he was moving forward, frame by frame without stopping. His mouth opened, his eyes focused directly on me, and the ground grew louder. I ran to the door and tried to open it, pulling the handle hard while my breath came out uneven and fast. The door didn't move, and the sound behind me became wet and heavy, like something dragging itself forward. When I turned around, my brother's head was already pushing out of the screen, bending the monitor outward as if it were soft. Blood smeared along the edge as his shoulders followed, and his arms reached forward with movements that looked wrong and uncontrolled. Before he fully came out, there was a moment where he stayed half inside the screen, staring at me with a look that mixed anger and pain so strongly that my legs felt weak. Then his body dropped to the floor, and he stood up far too quickly. He crossed the room in seconds and grabbed my arms with a grip that hurt immediately, his fingers digging into my skin while blood soaked through his clothes and onto the carpet. His face was close to mine, and his voice came out loud and raw. "This was your fault. You killed me." He screamed each word directly into my face while shaking me, his grip tightening every time I tried to pull away. I could barely keep my balance, and my arms felt useless under his strength. That's when I heard Lauren yelling from outside the apartment, asking why the door was locked and what was wrong. My brother's expression changed, his grip loosened, and his body jerked as if something was pulling him away. I twisted the handle again, and this time, the door opened. I stumbled forward and grabbed Lauren, holding onto her while my body shook uncontrollably and my breathing refused to slow down. She asked what happened, what I saw, and why my arms were red, but I couldn't explain anything in a way that sounded sane. When I looked back into the apartment, the room was empty, the laptop was off, and there was no sign of blood or damage anywhere. Lauren stayed close to me that night, watching me carefully while I barely slept. The days that followed were heavy and tense, filled with constant fear that something would happen again. Every sound made me flinch, and every notification made my chest tighten. Before the next breakdown, there was no relief, only waiting and exhaustion. I started therapy because I couldn't keep pretending everything was normal. The therapist asked me about my brother, about the accident, about the guilt I tried to avoid talking about. Saying it out loud felt worse than any image or message. I told her I was driving that night, that I was distracted, and that I didn't handle the turn correctly. I admitted that my brother wasn't wearing a seatbelt and that I never insisted, even though I knew better. I explained that the impact threw him forward, and there was nothing anyone could do after that. My chest felt tight as I spoke, and my hands shook the entire time. The therapist listened without interrupting and explained that guilt doesn't disappear when it's ignored because it looks for ways to come back stronger. After that session, the messages stopped. I no longer opened my brother's Facebook profile, and I removed everything connected to it from my phone and computer. I think about my brother every day, and that hasn't changed, but the fear has settled into something heavier and quieter. I still don't know what happened that night. I refuse to believe it was all in my head. When he touched me, I realized that it was real. No one will understand me, but what came out of that screen was a message from the dead. The first thing you need to understand is that nothing about me suggested I was the kind of man this would happen to, and that belief is exactly what made everything worse. I worked in an office, a regular job. I didn't think danger came from places like my desk, my apartment, or a casual conversation near the printer. Marla joined the company in early February, a few days before Valentine's Day. She wasn't loud, didn't dress to stand out, and didn't try to force herself into conversations. When she spoke, she did it softly, carefully, like she was always afraid of saying the wrong thing. That made people lower their voices around her, including me. She started talking to me after a few days, usually about work at first, then about small personal things like food she liked or shows she watched. I thought she was very pretty, and I knew she was single. Before asking her out, I told myself not to overthink it, not to assign meaning where there wasn't any. and not to expect anything more than a simple drink after work. Valentine's Day made it feel like a good excuse and actually a romantic idea. When I invited her, she smiled in a way that looked relieved, and she agreed immediately. The bar was close to my apartment, quiet enough to talk without raising our voices. We stayed longer than planned, and the conversation never stalled, which made me relax more than I should have. She laughed easily, asked questions that felt personal without being invasive, and kept telling me how comfortable she felt around me. When the bar closed, I offered her the couch without much thought, mostly because it felt awkward to send her home late. She accepted quickly as if she had already expected the offer. That should have stood out to me, but at the time, it just felt like chemistry. In the morning, I woke up to the sound of movement in my kitchen, which immediately put me on edge because I live alone and I am not used to hearing anyone else in my space. Marla was already dressed, cooking breakfast, moving confidently through my apartment like she knew where everything was. I felt surprised and slightly uncomfortable, but I didn't say anything because I didn't want to seem ungrateful or rude. She left later that day, kissed my cheek casually, and said she would text me. I watched her walk away and told myself it had just been a good date, nothing more. That weekend I went out with friends like I used to, but I kept thinking about how fast everything had happened, even though I didn't fully admit it to myself. I tried to convince myself that I was just nervous because it had been a while since I dated anyone seriously. When I got home late that night and unlocked my door, I immediately knew something was wrong because the lights were on and the TV was playing, even though I was certain I had turned everything off before leaving. My body reacted before my mind did, and I froze in the doorway listening. Marla was sitting on my couch wearing comfortable clothes, watching television like it was the most natural thing in the world. When I asked how she got inside, my voice came out tighter than I expected, and she responded calmly saying she had made a copy of my key earlier, asking if that was okay like it was a small favor. I felt very confused and somewhat nervous. I told her that was too much, that we were moving too fast and that she should have asked me first. She nodded, apologized softly, and then asked what I wanted for dinner, completely ignoring the fact that I was visibly shaken. She stayed the entire weekend. Every time I tried to bring up the conversation again, she redirected it, smiled, or acted hurt enough to make me back off. I started feeling trapped inside my own apartment, sleeping lightly, locking my bedroom door at night, and listening for movement. By Monday, I was exhausted, anxious, and desperate for distance, believing that work would create a barrier she couldn't cross. That illusion shattered the moment I saw her at the office, standing confidently among coworkers, laughing and touching people's arms while telling stories. When I approached the group, the mood shifted immediately, and several coworkers congratulated me, mentioning how happy they were for us. My confusion turned into dread when Marla casually said we were a couple and that we were planning a future together. She spoke about marriage like it was a scheduled task, saying she was just waiting for me to propose and that she trusted I would do it soon. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and my hands started shaking in a way I couldn't control. I asked her to talk after work, barely holding myself together for the rest of the day. Outside, I finally said everything I had been holding back, explaining that we were not together, that I never agreed to any of this, and that she needed to return the key and to leave me alone. Her reaction was immediate and intense. Her face hardened, her breathing became shallow, and her voice dropped when she told me I was humiliating her. After that, she stopped speaking to me entirely, and the silence felt heavier rather than relieving. Weeks passed with no interaction, and I slowly began to relax, thinking the situation had resolved itself. But the worst was yet to come. It all started on one of our coworkers' birthdays. I attended, confident that Marla wouldn't be there. She had been very isolated in recent weeks and didn't even have a relationship with the birthday guy. We heard a scream echo through the room, sharp enough to silence everyone. Marla stood outside the bathroom, shaking, crying, barely able to speak, saying one of our coworkers had attacked her and that she defended herself. Inside, the man lay unconscious on the floor. The room filled with panic, shouting and fear, and people immediately surrounded her, offering comfort and support. I felt guilt rise in my chest, thinking that maybe my rejection had pushed her into something traumatic. That thought ate at me, and I started checking on her, walking her home and staying close, believing I was helping someone fragile. Without asking, she moved back into my apartment. This time, she didn't even pretend it was temporary. She was cheerful, energetic, and disturbingly unaffected by what had happened. The man was hospitalized, unconscious, and she talked about it like it was already behind her. The disconnect terrified me. I slept less, avoided being alone with her when possible, and started feeling watched even when she wasn't in the room. One day, 2 police officers knocked on my door. They were asking for Marla by name. They explained everything carefully, telling me that the hospitalized man had woken up, spoken to them, and denied every accusation. The security footage confirmed his story, showing Marla following him, drugging his drink, and attacking him. As they spoke, Marla appeared behind me, calm and smiling as if this was just another inconvenience. When they arrested her, she didn't struggle. She looked at me and said, "Love required commitment, and commitment required action." I felt sick, dizzy, and ashamed, realizing how close I had come to being the next person she framed or harmed. Valentine's Day still arrives every year, but now it feels like a warning rather than a celebration. I learned that danger doesn't always come loudly or violently at first. Sometimes it comes quietly, smiling, and already holding a copy of your key. The first time I realized something was wrong, I was already staring at the screen and couldn't look away. That moment didn't feel exciting or mysterious. It felt heavy, like my body understood something my head refused to accept. I had always been curious about things people warned others not to touch. Not because I felt special, but because I hated not knowing. If something existed, I needed proof. That habit followed me into adulthood, especially during nights when I stayed awake watching YouTube videos about obscure parts of the internet. I didn't talk about it with my friends or family. Those videos became something private, something I watched with headphones on, replaying details and comments. The deep web wasn't presented as fantasy there, but as structure, a system that rewarded patience and obsession. What caught my attention the most was red rooms, not because of the violence, but because nobody could prove they were real. I didn't want horror. I wanted confirmation. I started slowly using basic tools that anyone could find with enough searching. Most nights ended the same way, with blank pages and dead links that led nowhere. That didn't frustrate me because it matched what the videos explained. Real things were hidden behind repetition and time. I found black markets, forums, and video directories that felt wrong but unimpressive. Everything looked transactional and cold. I never interacted with anyone. I stayed invisible, just observing, telling myself that was enough. Red rooms never appeared. Weeks passed without a trace, and part of me started thinking they were just another myth recycled for views. Still, I kept searching, night after night, following the same routine. Then one night, a red room appeared at the top of an empty page. It didn't load or animate. Before clicking anything, I sat back and tried to calm my breathing because my body reacted faster than my thoughts. My heart wasn't racing, but there was pressure in my chest that didn't fade. I checked the room, the door, the window, even though it made no sense. The red room asked a simple question about entering. No explanation followed, and that made it worse. I clicked yes, expecting something dramatic, but the same question appeared again, identical in every way. I hesitated, then clicked yes once more. The repetition started to bother me, not because it felt fake, but because it felt deliberate. Every time I answered, the page refreshed instantly, as if someone was waiting for that response. I told myself I could stop any time, but I didn't. When the room finally disappeared, nothing replaced it. No loading screen, no confirmation. I waited, staring at the screen until my eyes hurt, then shut the laptop and went to bed without sleeping. The next evening, when someone knocked on my door, I didn't know if it was influenced by my experience yesterday, but I was a little worried. I stayed quiet for several seconds, standing close enough to hear movement outside. A voice said my name and mentioned a delivery. It sounded normal, but my hands tightened around the door handle anyway. The moment I opened the door, everything collapsed into chaos. Hands grabbed my arms with force that didn't allow resistance. Another hand covered my mouth hard enough to hurt my jaw. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped. They moved fast and efficiently, like they had done this before. A hood went over my head and something solid pressed against my face, cutting off air. My wrists were pulled behind my back and secured tightly, making my shoulders burn. I was dragged into a vehicle and pushed down onto the seat. Someone kept pressure on my head while the car started moving. No one spoke, and the silence made it worse than threats ever could. I lost track of time as the car sped through turns. Breathing became harder, slower, until everything faded out. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was the position of my body, because I couldn't move. My wrists were tied to a chair, my ankles secured, my back forced straight. Panic didn't explode immediately. It built slowly as I tested every restraint and failed. Bright lights blinded me, aimed directly at my face. I tried to look away, but my head was pulled back roughly by someone standing behind me. My vision adjusted enough to see cameras placed around the room, all pointed at me. A screen turned on in front of me, filling with usernames and numbers that kept changing. I understood what it was before my mind could deny it. This wasn't a video archive. It was live. Men moved in and out of my view, faces covered, gestures calm and methodical. One of them adjusted a camera. Another checked the screen, nodding slowly. Requests appeared on the screen, and they followed them carefully, step by step, making sure everything was visible. They waited after each action, watching reactions, adjusting angles, continuing without hesitation. My body reacted before my voice did. I cried, begged, tried to explain anything that could make this stop. Nothing changed. This wasn't punishment or revenge. It was scheduled. I couldn't believe what I was experiencing. My curiosity about red rooms led me to this place as the protagonist. I just wanted to observe, but now I am the object. They began using devices meant to control pain precisely, not to end anything quickly. One of them placed clamps on my arms and legs, tightening them until my muscles locked and my hands lost strength. Another adjusted the chair again so my feet barely touched the floor, forcing my weight onto my shoulders and lower back. Every time my body tried to shift or resist, they corrected it immediately, tightening something else, pushing me back into position so the cameras never lost sight of my face. And after that, they focused on keeping me responsive. They poured cold water over my head without warning, then left me sitting there shaking while the light stayed fixed on my eyes. When my breathing slowed, one of them struck my leg hard enough to make my body jerk, not once, but repeatedly, waiting between each hit to make sure I stayed awake. The last thing I remember clearly was my vision narrowing as the lights stayed fixed on me. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. My body felt heavy and unresponsive, and my thoughts refused to connect properly. The environment was different, quieter, but I couldn't open my eyes immediately. A voice called my name, repeating it slowly until it broke through the fog in my head. When I finally managed to focus, I saw white walls and medical equipment around me. My throat hurt when I tried to speak, and my hands were free but weak. Someone pressed a button and left the room without explaining anything. I stayed there staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together what was real and what wasn't. But my thoughts kept circling back to the cameras. My mother was sitting next to the bed when I fully woke up. She looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept properly in days. When she saw my eyes open, she held my hand tightly and didn't say anything at first. I told her everything in a rush, afraid that if I stopped talking, the memories would slip away. I described the website, the red room, the men, the room, the broadcast. I needed her to believe me. She listened calmly, then told me this wasn't the first time I had told that story. According to her, I had never lived alone, never owned a computer, and had no access to the internet. She said I had been hospitalized before after obsessing over crime cases, always convinced I had been taken somewhere. The doctors called it a recurring episode. I stopped arguing and looked away. I listened to my mother, but I didn't accept what she was saying. After she left the room, I tested my hands, my wrists, my arms, slowly checking everything. I no longer had any wounds, but I am sure that they did not all disappear. I tried to remember everything that happened in the Red Room, although everything is in fragments. They erased my memory. I'm sure they'll come for me again. I was just another man scrolling through Tinder at night, sitting alone in my apartment killing time because sleep never came easily anymore. My life was simple and predictable. I worked, came home, and filled the silence with my phone. Tinder wasn't hope or romance for me. It was distraction, something that made the hours pass faster when the walls felt too close. That's when I matched with Marla. Her profile stood out without trying too hard. Natural photos, no forced poses, and always the same small dog in her arms. She looked warm, relaxed, and confident in a way that felt real instead of staged. She messaged first, and the conversation flowed without effort. She laughed easily, asked real questions, and complimented me in a way that didn't feel fake. I kept waiting for the moment where it would turn awkward or cold, but it never did. By the end of the night, she suggested meeting in person. We agreed to meet up at a cafe close to her place. Nothing special, just a simple date. I agreed immediately, telling myself that sometimes things just work out. I arrived early to the cafe and spent several minutes pretending to check my phone while watching the door. When Marla walked in, there was no confusion or disappointment. She looked exactly like her photos, but more live, more present, with a smile that felt directed only at me. She spoke with energy, leaned toward me while I talked, and paid attention in a way that made me feel seen. She touched my arm lightly once, just enough to make my chest tighten. I didn't understand why someone like her was sitting across from me, but I didn't question it. After one drink, she suggested leaving the cafe. She said her place was nearby and quieter. There was no hesitation in her voice, no playful pause. I nodded, trying to act calm while my heart beat too fast. Her apartment was clean and oddly empty, with no photos and no personal details. The music played softly while she poured drinks. We sat close on the couch, and when she kissed me, I didn't stop her. Before anything truly happened, I felt something slip. My focus faded, my reactions slowed, and my body stopped responding the way it should have. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't form properly. The fear didn't hit immediately. At first, it was confusion mixed with embarrassment, like my body was failing me at the worst possible moment. My head felt heavy, my arms weak, and my vision blurred in and out as I struggled to stay upright. I tried to push myself off the couch, but my legs didn't cooperate. My mouth opened, yet the sound that came out was barely a whisper. Marla watched me with patience, her face calm, her posture relaxed, as if this was unfolding exactly as planned. When I woke up, my wrists and ankles were tied tightly to a bed frame. The cords cut into my skin when I moved, and the room around me was unfamiliar and windowless. Panic rose fast, filling my chest until breathing became difficult. I pulled against the restraints, my muscles shaking from effort and fear, while my thoughts raced without direction. I tried to scream again, but my throat felt raw and dry, producing only broken sounds. The door opened slowly, and Marla stepped inside. A man followed her, his head covered with a dark cloth. The door closed behind them with a final sound that made my stomach drop. Before they touched me, they waited. That waiting felt deliberate, like they wanted me fully awake and aware of what was coming. My breathing grew louder, uneven, and impossible to control as my eyes moved between them. The man approached first and grabbed my arm with firm pressure. He pressed a heavy object against my skin and increased the force slowly. Pain spread deep through my arm, sharp enough to force a scream out of me as my body jerked against the restraints. Marla watched closely, her eyes focused, her mouth relaxed. She didn't flinch when I begged or when my voice broke. She nodded once, and the man moved to my legs, repeating the same action until my muscles cramped violently. I cried openly, my face wet, my voice cracking as I asked why this was happening. I told them they had the wrong person, that I didn't know them, that I would do anything to make it stop. Marla laughed softly, not out of humor, but out of satisfaction. She stepped closer and looked directly into my face. You really don't remember? I swear I don't know you. You remember what you chose to forget. She spoke about the dog, the small white dog, the night I hit it with my car and drove away without stopping. The memory came back with brutal clarity, tightening my chest until it hurt to breathe. I didn't interrupt her. I couldn't. My body shook uncontrollably, not just from pain, but from understanding exactly why I was there. She explained how she found me using cameras, license plates, and weeks of watching my routine. She talked about patience, about planning, and about knowing that someone like me would eventually look for connection online. I knew you would swipe. You always do. The man returned to the bed and twisted my fingers one by one, slow enough to make each movement count. The pain forced screams out of me that I couldn't control, my body arching uselessly against the restraints. I begged again, apologizing repeatedly, promising anything I could think of. My words overlapped and tangled, sounding desperate and weak even to my own ears. Marla leaned close enough that I could feel her breathe. You didn't stop. You didn't look back. They left me there afterward, alone, shaking and exhausted, my body aching everywhere they had touched. When Marla returned, she cut the ropes without ceremony. She didn't apologize or threaten me. She simply told me to get dressed and leave. I failed trying to stand, my legs barely holding me upright. She watched without helping as I struggled toward the door. The hallway outside was empty, cold, and smelled old, like no one truly lived there. Days later, I realized the apartment wasn't hers. The building was abandoned. The Tinder profile disappeared. The phone number stopped working. There was nothing to trace. I thought about reporting everything, but every time I tried to speak, the image of that dog came back, lying broken on the street while I drove away. I deleted Tinder and stopped looking for company online. I avoid driving at night whenever possible, and sudden sounds still make my chest tighten. I don't think of Marla every day, but I never forget her. I don't believe she wanted to kill me. She wanted me to carry it with me, and I deserved it.
My friend Hannah and I decided to celebrate a different kind of Valentine's Day, honoring our friendship without thinking about our broken hearts. It was just a simple girls' night out. But our lives changed completely. Hannah and I have known each other since we were little girls. She was the perfect date. I packed a backpack with cheap wine, snacks, and pajamas and went to Hannah's house because neither of us wanted to be alone that night. We were both recently separated, but that wasn't going to stop us from enjoying the day. The plan was simple. Stay inside, watch movies, and let the night pass without making it a big deal. Couples had already disappeared into their plans, and the street felt empty earlier than usual. We put on a movie, opened the wine, and tried to relax. Half an hour later, we realized we forgot most of the snacks. We laughed it off, grabbed our jackets, and went out, telling ourselves it would only take a few minutes. The walk back from the store should have been forgettable, but something about it stuck with me later. The street was almost silent, until we heard footsteps behind us, close enough to notice, slow enough to make us turn around. It was Ethan, Hannah's neighbor. I recognized him immediately because he always looked like someone trying not to be seen. He smiled too wide when he saw us and asked how we were doing, then asked if we were planning to spend the night alone. The question came out casual, but his eyes stayed fixed on Hannah. He started talking without stopping, explaining that his wife had left him for another man, saying it like a joke, even though his hands kept shaking. He said nights like Valentine's Day made everything worse and that people never understood what betrayal really felt like. Hannah nodded politely and tried to unlock the door while he talked. We told him we were sorry and said we were tired. He finally stepped back, waved, and walked toward his house. We locked the door behind us and stood there for a second longer than necessary. Hannah said he was strange, then shrugged it off, and we went back to the living room. Nothing else happened for a while. Then, a sound came from outside late at night, after the second movie had already started and the wine was almost gone. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to pull my attention away from the screen. Hannah muted the TV, and we both listened without speaking, trying to decide if it was worth reacting. There was a long pause where the house felt exposed, like every wall was thinner than it should have been. I told myself it was probably nothing and stood up, because neither of us wanted to admit we were scared already. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole, seeing only darkness and the empty porch. When I opened the door, Ethan rushed forward so fast I didn't even have time to react. He slammed into the door with his shoulder, forcing his way inside and knocking me backward. The door closed behind him, and the lock clicked before I could even think about running. He had a gun in his hand, and his face looked completely different from earlier. He started yelling immediately, demanding to know where Hannah's ex was, shouting his name over and over. Hannah kept saying he doesn't live there anymore, her voice shaking as she tried to back away. Ethan stepped closer, waving the gun and screaming that he knew the truth, that everyone was lying to him. He accused Hannah's ex of stealing his wife and ruining his life, and he would not listen when she said he wasn't there. He pointed the gun at us and told us to move, and we obeyed because there was nothing else we could do. He forced us down the hallway and into the bedroom, slamming the door shut behind us. He kept pacing while asking the same questions again and again. Hannah lied and said her ex was coming back soon, hoping it would calm him or buy time, but it only made him angrier. Before touching us, he stood there staring, like he was deciding something. That silence was worse than the shouting, because neither of us knew what would happen next. Then he told us to sit on the bed and not look at him. He ordered us to take off our clothes until we were in our underwear, and we did it slowly, shaking so badly it was hard to move. He tied our hands with something thin and rough that burned into our skin, then took out his phone and started filming, laughing and telling us to say his name. He hit Hannah first, then turned to me, moving with intention instead of panic. Every strike felt planned, like he wanted us to remember it. He kept yelling that nobody disrespected him, and that this was what happened to people who took things from him. When he pulled out the lighter, Hannah started crying louder, begging him to stop. He didn't listen. He burned us in short bursts, watching our reactions and laughing like it entertained him. There was a moment when Hannah managed to free one hand, and I saw hope flash across her face before fear took over. She grabbed a heavy vase from the dresser and swung it at him, hitting his shoulder instead of his head. Ethan reacted instantly, grabbing her hair and throwing her to the floor. The gun slid away, but he didn't even look at it. He picked up a thick wooden rod from the corner of the room and raised it without hesitation. He hit her again and again, his face empty, his movements slow and deliberate. Hannah screamed at first, then stopped responding, and he kept going even after her body went still. I covered my face and pressed myself against the wall, unable to move, unable to look away from the sound. When he finally stopped, he stood there, breathing hard, then turned to me without emotion. He lit a blanket on fire and threw it onto the floor, watching the flames grow. He locked the door from the outside and walked away, leaving us inside as the fire spread. Smoke filled the room quickly, burning my throat and eyes. My wrists hurt so badly I could barely think, but panic forced me to move. I crawled across the floor to Hannah, touching her face, and realizing she was gone. I worked the ties against the broken bed frame until they snapped, my hands shaking so badly I could barely control them. The flames climbed the walls and the heat pressed in from every direction. I smashed the window with a wooden rod, cutting myself as I climbed out. I ran barefoot into the street, screaming for help, until lights turned on and doors opened. Police and fire trucks arrived in minutes, and Ethan was arrested that same night. He was sentenced to life in prison. Hannah died in that room. The house burned down completely. Valentine's Day passed like it never existed. The first thing you need to understand is that I wasn't distracted, drunk, or half asleep that night, because I know people like to assume that when something bad happens. I was fully awake, tired from work, yes, but aware of when I was and what time it was. It was late, close to 11, and I was taking the subway home like I'd done hundreds of times before. I work downtown, long hours, nothing exciting, and the subway is part of my routine, whether I like it or not. The line I take has a reputation, and everyone in New York knows it. People talk about it being strange, about seeing things that don't quite fit. But after a while, you stop listening. You normalize behavior that shouldn't feel normal. That night I got on the train, found a seat and leaned back, already thinking about getting home and taking off my shoes. The car was half full, quiet in that uncomfortable way where everyone avoids looking at each other too much. Nothing stood out at first, and that is what makes what happened harder to explain. I sat there for maybe a minute before I felt that uncomfortable pressure in my chest that tells you someone is watching you. Not casually, not by accident, but with intention. Across from me sat an older woman wearing a long dark coat, even though it wasn't that cold. Her posture was stiff and unnatural, like she was holding herself in place. She was staring straight at me. I mean directly at my face, without blinking or shifting her eyes, even once. Next to her sat a man, around my age, maybe a little older, slouched forward with his hands clasped between his knees. He never looked up, not when the train moved, not when people got on or off. He looked tense, like his body was working hard to stay still. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting, because people stare on the subway and sometimes they're just weird. Still, every time I looked back at the woman, her eyes were exactly where I left them. Her mouth stayed slightly open, and her breathing, if she was breathing, was impossible to notice. I stood up and moved closer to the door, pretending I was getting ready for my stop, even though it was still several stations away. My heart was already beating too fast, and I hated that I could feel it in my throat. At the next stop, a man got on and stood near the pole in front of me, and the moment his eyes locked onto mine, I knew something was very wrong. Before anything physical happened, there was a long stretch of silence that made my skin crawl. The doors closed, the train started moving again, and the standing man didn't look away, even once. His expression was serious, focused, like he was counting something in his head. I glanced back at the woman and she leaned forward just slightly, enough to confirm she was still watching me. My hands tightened around my bag and I scanned the car looking for anyone paying attention, but everyone seemed trapped in their own world. The standing man stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, and my body reacted before my brain could catch up. I shifted sideways, trying to put distance between us, but the train slowed, and that is when he grabbed me. His grip was strong and sudden, fingers digging into my arm through my coat. I shouted and tried to twist free, my bag slipping off my shoulders as the doors opened. People stared, but no one moved. Dragged me out onto the platform, and I managed to wrench my arm free by slamming my elbow backward. I didn't wait to see his reaction. I ran. Shoes slipped slightly on the concrete as the train doors slammed shut behind me. I took the stairs, stopping, my lungs burning, my legs shaking as I burst out onto the street. The night air felt cold and sharp, and the city suddenly felt empty, like I had stepped into the wrong version of it. I ran without direction, turning corners at random, driven by pure panic and the sound of footsteps that I could not always hear, but felt were there. My thoughts were scattered, jumping from escape routes to worst outcomes, and I could barely keep track of where I was. I turned into a narrow passage between two buildings without thinking, only realizing my mistake when the space closed in, and there was no way forward. I stopped, breath ragged, and turned around just as the man from the subway stepped into the entrance. He raised his hands slowly, his face tense but not angry, and spoke in a low, controlled voice. "Calm down. I'm not going to hurt you." I pressed myself against the wall, my legs weak, my voice shaking as I told him to stay back. I begged him to leave me alone, to let me go, because I didn't understand what was happening. "I pulled you out because you were in danger. That woman on the train was dead." His words didn't make sense at first, and I told him that, my voice breaking as fear turned into confusion. He took a careful step closer and explained that he worked at a morgue and knew what dead skin looked like, knew when a body was being held up instead of standing on its own. "The man next to her was holding her. He was waiting for the right stop, and you caught his attention." I stood there, frozen, just overwhelmed and desperate to survive. I asked him why he didn't warn me instead of dragging me, and he said there was no time, that people freeze when they are warned. I wanted to believe him, because believing him meant I wasn't alone anymore. I thanked him, my hands still shaking, and told him I needed to get somewhere safe. He stepped aside and motioned toward the street. "Go now. Do not stop." I walked past him slowly, every muscle tight, and when I stepped back onto the sidewalk, I saw the man from the subway standing under a streetlight, smiling directly at me. That is when I ran again. The man chased me, his footsteps fast and steady behind mine, and panic pushed my body beyond what I thought it could handle. I crossed streets without looking, barely avoided cars, and felt my legs screaming in protest as I forced them to keep moving. I ducked into an apartment lobby and slammed the door shut, pressing my weight against the glass as he hit it hard with his shoulder. For a moment, I thought it would break, but then he stopped. Behind him stood the man who claimed he saved me, watching quietly, and the look they exchanged told me everything I needed to know. I ran deeper into the building, found another exit, and didn't stop until I reached a crowded avenue filled with noise and people. I stayed there until my body finally gave out, shaking uncontrollably among strangers. Nothing was reported the next day, which somehow made everything worse. I changed my routines, my routes, and my habits, but I never regained the sense of safety I had before. That night taught me that sometimes the danger is not loud or obvious, and sometimes the people who claim to save you are only waiting for a better moment.
I didn't open Facebook looking for trouble. I opened it because I needed work. I was sitting at my desk early in the morning, half awake, scrolling through job groups, reading posts that all sounded the same, when I saw a group that made no sense in that context. It wasn't related to work, freelancing, or hiring. It had a ridiculous profile picture of a grown man wearing party glasses and a cheap hat, smiling in a way that felt forced even through a small image. The group name said, "Fans of John Smith." No description, no rules, nothing else. What stopped me wasn't the name, because it was generic, but the number of members. More than 700 people. That didn't match the joke at all. I stared at it longer than I should have, feeling slightly uncomfortable but also curious in a silly, harmless way. I wanted to understand why so many people were part of something that looked pointless. I clicked the group, expecting to laugh and close it immediately. The page took longer than usual to load, which made me impatient at first. But when it finally appeared, my attention locked in place. Every single member had the same face as their profile picture. It was the same man from the group photo, wearing the same glasses and hat, staring directly at the camera. Some profiles had small differences: a scarf, different glasses, a hat tilted slightly to one side, but the expression never changed. It wasn't edited badly or filtered. It looked real, which made the repetition disturbing instead of funny. The group feed was worse. There were no text posts, no jokes, no explanations. Just photos of that man, taken in different places and angles. Each post had dozens of comments, sometimes more than 100, and every comment came from the same face again. These were not empty or inactive profiles. They posted daily, commented on each other, and interacted constantly. I clicked several profiles, trying to find a mistake, a crack, something that explained the pattern. They had friends, tagged photos, likes, and normal activity mixed with more images of that man. Different names, different locations, same face. It felt coordinated in a way I couldn't explain. I closed the group after a few minutes, telling myself it was some kind of performance or online joke taken too far. I went back to job searching, forcing my focus elsewhere, convinced that once the tab was closed, the whole thing would stop existing for me. A few hours later, my phone buzzed with a Facebook notification, and my body reacted before my brain did. My chest tightened and my hand hesitated before unlocking the screen, because part of me already knew what I was going to see. It was a friend request from a profile with that same face, same glasses, same hat, different name. I checked the profile carefully, scrolling slowly, trying to calm myself by analyzing details, but everything looked real and active. I hadn't joined the group, commented, or reacted to anything, so I couldn't understand how they found me. I didn't accept or decline the request. I closed the app and placed the phone face down on the table, telling myself that ignoring it was the smartest option. 10 minutes later, another notification appeared. Another request. Same face, different name again. Before the third notification arrived, I felt a knot forming in my stomach. I opened Facebook again, trying to stay calm, and saw that the first profile had sent me a message. It wasn't text. It was an image. The man's face filled the screen, closer than before, staring straight ahead without any background. I didn't respond. I closed the app, but the notifications didn't stop. Over the next hour, my phone filled with requests, one after another, until there were more than 100 waiting. Blocking them barely helped, because new ones kept appearing faster than I could react. Before doing anything else, I logged out of my account, uninstalled the app, and shut my phone down completely. My hands were shaking and my breathing was uneven, because this no longer felt like an online prank. It felt organized, deliberate, and directed at me. 3 days passed without any new notifications, which helped me convince myself that stepping away had worked. I needed food and I needed to feel normal again, so I left my phone at home and went to the grocery store, telling myself that real life had nothing to do with what happened online. I walked through the aisles slowly, focusing on small decisions like choosing brands and checking prices, trying to ground myself in ordinary actions. That sense of control disappeared the moment I noticed someone standing still at the end of the aisle. It was him. Same man, same glasses, same hat. He wasn't holding a basket or a cart, and he wasn't pretending to shop. He was, just standing there, watching me without blinking, his expression flat and empty. My heart started racing and my legs felt weak, but I forced myself to turn away and move faster toward the exit because panic would only make things worse. I dropped my basket by accident, heard it hit the floor, and didn't stop to pick it up. I ran past people and pushed through the automatic doors. Outside, I looked back once and saw him still inside the store, standing in the same place, as if he hadn't moved at all. I didn't wait to see more. I went straight home, checking every reflection along the way, feeling exposed and watched. When my building came into view, my chest tightened again, because he was already there. He stood across the street, facing the entrance, staring directly at me without moving. I fumbled with my keys, got inside, and locked the door behind me as fast as I could. From my window, I looked down and saw that he wasn't alone anymore. There were at least 10 men standing on the sidewalk, all identical, all facing my building, all completely silent. None of them looked around or spoke to each other. They just waited. Before anything else happened, I grabbed my phone and called the police, struggling to explain what I was seeing without sounding insane. When they arrived, the street was empty. All men vanished. Nothing that supported my story. That night, I barely slept. When I woke up in the middle of the night, pressure on my arms held me down. 5 men stood around my bed, moving quickly and confidently, tying my wrists and ankles while another pressed a hand over my mouth. They dressed me like them, placed the hat on my head, adjusted the glasses on my face, and took photos with bright flashes that burned my eyes. You belong now. You are one of us. Then they left. Morning came, but nothing felt normal again. My phone, laptop, and documents were gone, and every attempt to access my accounts failed. It was as if my digital presence had been erased completely, leaving behind a version of me I didn't recognize. I never saw those men again, but the damage was done. I moved months later, changed numbers, and avoided social media as much as possible, knowing that whatever they wanted from me had already been taken. Last week, my younger brother laughed while showing me his phone during dinner. He found a weird Facebook group. All the members looked the same, like a funny guy with glasses. I didn't ask to see it. I didn't need to.
If you are watching this on Valentine's Day, stop for a second, because this story starts in a normal place and ends in a way that still keeps me awake at night. That day I was walking with my dog in the same park near my apartment like every morning. While my dog pulled the leash near the fountain, I heard my name spoken clearly behind me, and the sound made my shoulders tense before I even turned around. When I faced the voice, I saw a woman standing there with a calm smile that did not move when she noticed my reaction. It took me several seconds to recognize her, because my brain resisted the idea before accepting it. Her name was Lena, and we had not seen each other since we were teenagers, back when promises were easy and consequences felt unreal. We started talking in an awkward way, filling the silence with safe questions that avoided anything important, and I noticed quickly that she answered too fast, like she had rehearsed every possible version of this conversation. I also noticed that she watched me closely while answering, like she was checking if I matched an image she had kept for years. She told me she knew I lived nearby and that she had seen me walking my dog before, which made me uncomfortable even though I tried not to show it. When I asked how long she had been back in town, she said she returned recently and waited for the right moment to see me, and the way she said it made my chest tighten even though her tone stayed soft. I knew I would run into you eventually. You live close. It was only a matter of time. I tried to laugh it off, but she watched my face closely, like she was checking my reaction. When we said goodbye, she called my name again, and when I turned, her expression changed slightly. I didn't forget the promise. I'm back. I smiled out of reflex, nodded, and walked away faster than usual, already trying to convince myself that it meant nothing. Valentine's Day arrived a few days later, and I tried not to think about Lena even though the memory of her words kept coming back when I was alone. That morning, a knock on my door interrupted my routine, and before opening it, I stood still, listening, feeling my heart beat harder than it should. When I opened the door, she was there, standing straight and calm, looking at me like she belonged in that space. I asked how she found my address, and she avoided the question without changing her expression. She reminded me of something we said when we were 15, about a silly promise when we were teens. We promised each other that if we weren't married to other people by the time we turned 30, we would marry each other. And here I am. I waited 15 years for this moment. Hearing it out loud made my skin crawl because it sounded serious in her mouth. I told her it was a childish joke and explained that I had a girlfriend, trying to keep my voice steady. Her reaction was immediate and overwhelming, as she started crying loudly and accused me of betraying her, stepping closer until I had to block her with my arms. I warned her to leave and said I would call the police if she did not calm down. You lied to me! You chose someone else! She stopped crying suddenly, wiped her face, and told me I was making a mistake, adding that we would be together forever, either alone or with no one else. Then she walked away, leaving me shaking in my doorway. You will regret this. I almost canceled my Valentine's dinner that night, but I convinced myself that fear was not a reason to change plans, even though my hands were shaking while I grabbed my keys. I texted my girlfriend Rachel to tell her I was on my way, and she replied that I should meet her at the restaurant instead to keep the surprise. At the restaurant, time passed too slowly, and every minute without a response made my thoughts darker and harder to control. I called her phone again and again, listening to it ring until my throat felt tight. When someone sat across from me, I looked up ready to complain, but the face in front of me froze me in place. She had Rachel's hair, Rachel's clothes, and Rachel's posture, but her eyes were wrong, focused, and excited. You look tense. Valentine's Day does that to people. Lena smiled and leaned closer, and my body reacted before my mind as fear ran through me and made it hard to breathe. My hands trembled as I told her to stop and demanded to know where Rachel was, but she laughed openly, enjoying the attention and the confusion around us. People stared while she acted calm and affectionate, touching my hand and calling me by my girlfriend's name. Security approached when I raised my voice and I tried to explain that she was pretending, that something was wrong, but Lena started crying again, playing the role perfectly. We were asked to leave, and outside she followed me, still talking about destiny and promises. You should not have rejected me. This could have been easy. We are meant to be together, but I fixed the problem. Those last words made me feel desperate. I ran to my car and drove to Rachel's apartment as fast as traffic allowed, calling her nonstop while my fear turned into panic. When I reached her place, the door was unlocked. Inside the bedroom, I found her on the floor, tied, shaved, and lifeless, and my legs almost gave out as I realized she was gone. The walls were decorated with her hair placed carefully, like trophies. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Lena standing in the doorway, holding a bag and smiling with satisfaction. She told me she removed the obstacle and that now we could finally be together. When she reached for me, I stepped back and tripped, and when she grabbed my arm, I reacted without thinking, kicking her knee and pushing her away. She fell hard and hit her head, screaming my name. I ran out of the apartment and drove straight to the police station, barely able to speak, barely able to breathe, but desperate to get away from her. Lena was arrested that night, and they later confirmed that she had planned everything for years, watching, waiting, and preparing. Rachel was buried a week later, and I still visit her grave, even though it hurts every time.
The last normal thing I remember is helping my neighbor carry boxes of canned food into the community center while she laughed because one of them broke and spilled everywhere. That image keeps coming back, not because it was important, but because it proves there was a before. My name doesn't matter much. I lived alone on Alder Street, worked nights, slept during the day, and stayed out of trouble. The block was quiet, predictable, and mostly invisible to the rest of the city. That kind of place where nothing big ever happened, and people liked it that way. Claudia lived 2 houses down from me. She was younger than most of us on the block and impossible to ignore. She trained circus acts in her yard, practiced with ropes and balance gear, and turned every free space into something useful. She organized food drives, art events, and activities for kids who had nowhere else to go. I helped her often. I drove donations, fixed broken things, and stood guard when she practiced dangerous routines. It wasn't friendship in the deep sense, but there was trust, and that mattered more than small talk. The first sign that something was wrong was how suddenly she disappeared from everything. One day, she was everywhere, and the next day, she was nowhere. No texts, no calls, no notes, nothing. At first, I tried to be reasonable about it. People leave town, people change plans. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, even though that didn't sit right with what I knew about her. Days passed, and her house stayed untouched. No lights at night, no noise, no movement behind the curtains. Her mailbox filled up, and flyers she had posted stayed where they were, slowly peeling from the walls. The tension built slowly, not as panic, but as constant awareness. Every time I walked past her place, I looked longer than I should have. Every time I heard a noise, I checked the street. When the police finally showed up, the tone of everything shifted. They knocked on doors and asked questions without urgency. When I spoke to one officer, he told me Claudia had been reported missing 15 days earlier by her family. They said there were no signs of forced entry and no immediate suspects. Because of that, they were leaning toward calling it a voluntary disappearance. I felt my stomach drop when he said it, because I knew she would never leave without telling someone. A few days after the police visit, something changed that made the street feel unsafe in a way I couldn't explain to anyone else. That afternoon, I stood by my window longer than usual, watching Claudia's house, waiting for something to happen. The waiting itself was exhausting. My body felt tight, like I was bracing for impact without knowing from where. Cars passed, people walked by, and nothing broke the pattern. Then the vans arrived. 2 dark vans pulled up in front of Claudia's house just before sunset. 6 people got out, all adults, all wearing full costumes that covered their faces and bodies. These weren't playful outfits or cheap masks. They were detailed, worn, and disturbing. One wore a fox head with cracked paint. Another had a bird mask with long beak-like features. One was wrapped in fabric strips that hid their shape completely. The last one stepped out slowly, wearing a Mickey Mouse head that looked old, dirty, and damaged around the eyes. They didn't look around. They didn't talk to neighbors. They unlocked Claudia's door like they belonged there. Fear started to sink in at that moment, not sharp, but heavy. My chest felt tight as I watched them carry bags, boxes, and instruments inside. Drums, metal objects, large wrapped items I couldn't identify. That night, the sound started. Low drums, slow and repetitive, vibrating through the walls. It went on for hours without stopping, and I couldn't sleep because it felt intentional, like it was meant to be heard. Before the night I saw them in the yard, there was a stretch of evenings where the music changed. It became slower, deeper, and more deliberate. I stopped turning on my TV because it made me miss sounds I needed to hear. That night, I stepped into my yard and stood still, listening. The air felt heavy, not because of temperature, but because everything around me was quiet, except their drums. I moved to the fence and found a narrow gap between boards. My heart was racing and my hands were shaking as I leaned in to look. I told myself to remember details, to stay focused, and to stay quiet. They were gathered in a circle around a small fire. The masks looked worse in the firelight, distorted and lifeless. One of them dragged something across the ground toward a hole that had already been dug. The shape under the cloth was unmistakable, human-sized, limp. They started lowering it into the ground with care, like they were following instructions. The moment before they stopped felt endless. My breath caught in my throat and my legs felt weak. Then everything froze. The one in the Mickey mask slowly turned its head and leaned forward until its face lined up with mine through the fence. We stared at each other in complete silence. I ran. I didn't stop running until I reached my front door. My hands slipped on the handle before I managed to get inside and lock it behind me. The street outside was silent and the drums had stopped. I rushed down the hallway toward my bedroom to grab my phone, already planning what I would say to the police. The light switch didn't work, and the darkness felt deliberate. Someone was sitting on the edge of my bed. They didn't move or speak. The mask hid everything except the shape of their head. I stepped back slowly, my breathing loud in my ears, my legs shaking, but still working. When I turned toward the living room, another figure sat in my chair, facing me. Different mask, same stillness. They were blocking every path out. Panic took over completely. I ran for the front door, unlocked it, and burst outside without looking back. Across the street, under the streetlight, Mickey stood waiting. He held a knife in his hand, and dark stains covered the blade. He didn't raise it or step forward. None of them followed me. They just watched. I didn't sleep at all that night. When I finally called the police in the morning, my voice sounded wrong, even to me. They searched both houses and found nothing. No people, no masks, no signs of digging. A few days later, the group returned as if nothing had happened. They stood outside their house sometimes, watching me leave and watching me come back. Every encounter started with a pause where nothing happened, and I waited for it to get worse. They never needed to touch me again. Claudia's case slowly faded into paperwork and silence. Voluntary disappearance. No evidence. No closure. I still live on Alder Street. I don't help anyone anymore. I don't look through fences. I don't open my curtains at night. They still live there. Sometimes they stand outside, completely still, facing my house.
The first night I slept alone at that apartment after my parents died, I knew I couldn't do it alone. The place was too big for one person, too quiet, and too expensive, but it was all I had left of them. Money became a problem fast. Bills stacked up, repairs appeared out of nowhere, and my salary never seemed to stretch far enough. I tried ignoring it at first, then I tried cutting expenses, but reality kept pushing back harder every month. Posting the roommate ad felt wrong, like I was opening a door that should stay closed. I told myself it was temporary and that I would be careful, even though I knew I needed more help than I wanted to admit. Sandy answered the ad the same day. She was close to my age, had a steady job, and wrote messages that felt polite and calm. When she came to see the apartment, she looked around slowly, touched nothing, and said it felt peaceful. That word stayed with me. Living together started better than I expected. She paid on time, kept shared spaces clean, and never crossed obvious boundaries. I remember thinking that maybe I had worried for nothing. Sandy had habits, but at first they seemed harmless. She liked routines, liked cleaning late at night, and liked organizing things in neat lines. It felt normal enough. Then the jars appeared gradually. Inside them were tiny objects, pins, hair, ties, buttons, and even insects. I noticed them one evening and asked her about it casually, trying not to sound judgmental. She smiled and said she liked keeping things that others ignored. She said it helped her feel in control and that she had been doing it for years. The way she spoke was soft and careful, like she was choosing each word. Over time, some of the objects felt familiar. A hair tie I was sure I had lost. A makeup item I couldn't find anymore. When I asked her about those, she said she found them around the apartment and kept them so they wouldn't be wasted. I told myself I was being dramatic. She wasn't aggressive, she wasn't rude, and she never touched my things in front of me. Still, something about the way she watched me while I spoke made me feel exposed, like she was memorizing me instead of listening. The shift happened slowly, but once I noticed it, I couldn't stop seeing it. Things I threw away didn't stay gone. Used tissues, broken earrings, and old makeup wipes started appearing in jars inside her room. Before confronting her, I stood outside her door longer than I should have. It was slightly open and I could see rows of jars lined up carefully. She had dates written on them, and some had my name. My chest tightened, and for the first time, I locked my bedroom door that night. When I asked her directly, my voice shook, even though I tried to keep it calm. She didn't deny it, and she didn't apologize either. She said she kept pieces of me because people disappear and objects are more reliable. From that point on, fear became practical. I double-checked doors, paid attention to sounds, and avoided leaving personal items unattended. Sandy noticed the change and became more aggressive, more present, and more emotional. Before every strange incident, there was silence. Not peaceful silence, but the kind that made me stop whatever I was doing and listen. That silence always came right before something was missing or out of place. I started sleeping lightly, waking up at the smallest sound and pretending everything was fine during the day. The problems really escalated when I met Elliot. We met at a small cafe I used to stop at after work. One afternoon, he sat at the table next to mine because the place was crowded, and the conversation started in a simple way. I told Sandy about Elliot during dinner, trying to sound casual. I mentioned that we met at a cafe and that we liked each other. Her reaction was immediate, even if she tried to hide it. She stopped eating and stared at me like she was processing bad news. She asked questions that felt too specific and too focused. I could tell she was holding something back. After that night, her collecting escalated. She no longer hid it. I found jars in the bathroom and the kitchen, holding things I never wanted to see again. When I confronted her, she cried and said she loved me. Before she begged me not to kick her out, there was that silence again, heavy and expectant, like the apartment was listening. She said I was making a mistake, that Elliot would leave me, and that she was the only one who would never hurt me. Her words didn't sound angry. They sounded convinced. I told her she had to leave. My voice was weak, my hands were cold, and my mind was racing, but I knew I couldn't keep living like that. After Sandy left, Elliot moved in, and for a short time, I felt safer. I didn't tell him everything, but I told him enough to explain why I checked locks and windows every night. The first time I saw Sandy again, she was across the street watching the building. She didn't wave or approach me. She just stood there wearing a jacket that looked exactly like mine. Before each encounter, my phone would go silent. The street would feel empty, and I would feel that same pressure building in my chest. She followed us. She appeared at my house all the time. She screamed things about Elliot that made my skin crawl, saying he lied and that she knew because she watched. One night before anything happened, I woke up for no clear reason. The room was quiet and I could hear Elliot breathing next to me. That silence stretched until I realized we were not alone. Sandy was standing by the bed, holding scissors and a glass jar. She had already cut some of Elliot's hair, and she was focused, slow and careful. When she looked at me, she smiled like she was finishing a task. When Elliot pushed her away, she screamed my name and lunged at him, swinging the scissors close enough to cut skin. We fought her together, panicked and clumsy until she ran. The restraining order came later, along with promises that didn't mean much. A year and a half passed, and life almost felt normal again. Almost. But one day in work, when I reached my desk, there was a small glass jar sitting perfectly centered on my desk. I didn't touch it at first. That silence returned, thick and heavy, pressing against my ears. Inside the jar was a human finger. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just stood there shaking, knowing exactly who had left it and what it meant. The police arrived later, but by then, I already understood that Sandy never stopped collecting. I'm trying to move out of the apartment. Selling it felt like giving up, but staying felt worse. Elliot left too. The restraining order still exists, but it doesn't stop her from watching. Sometimes things still disappear. Sometimes I find jars where they don't belong, and I know Sandy is still out there, saving pieces of me.
I moved into that apartment thinking only about rent and classes, unaware of how much damage it would cause. I had arrived alone with little money and no margin to fail, so sharing rent was the only option I had. I had moved to the city yesterday to begin my university studies, ready to change my life forever. And that's what happened. Paul moved in the next day. He didn't greet me like someone excited to meet a roommate, but like someone checking who else had entered his territory. He was thin, quiet, and always tense, as if his thoughts were running faster than his body. He went straight to his room and locked the door without explaining anything. Later that night, we talked in the kitchen. He spoke softly and avoided eye contact, but his words came out heavy. He told me he had moved because something followed him, something that watched and waited. He said he needed rules, locks, and silence. I thought he was unstable, and that scared me more than anything supernatural. The first days passed with an uncomfortable routine. Paul barely left his room, and when he did, he moved fast, checking doors and windows before sitting down. He talked about dark energies, about being watched, and about how whatever followed him was patient. I listened, but only because ignoring him felt rude, not because I believed a word of it. Before anything strange happened, there was a pattern of pauses. Moments when Paul stopped mid-sentence and listened, moments when he asked me to lower my voice for no clear reason. He said silence mattered, and that noise attracted attention. I joked about stress and exams, but he didn't respond. One afternoon, I came back from campus and found a kitchen cabinet open. I closed it and continued unpacking, but when I turned around, it was open again. I checked the hinges and told myself it was just old furniture, even though I had closed it carefully. That night, I heard footsteps in the hallway long after Paul had gone to his room. They were slow, deliberate, and stopped exactly outside my door. I waited for him to knock or speak, but nothing happened. After a long minute, the steps moved away and I stayed awake until morning. From that point on, fear stopped being an idea and started becoming physical. I felt it in the way my shoulders stayed tight and in how I avoided looking down the hallway at night. Sounds started happening when Paul was not home, which made it impossible to blame him or his paranoia. Before the bathroom door opened by itself, there was a silence so complete that it felt intentional. No traffic, no pipes, no distant voices, just the sound of my breathing getting louder as I stood frozen in the hall. I watched the handle turn slowly as if someone was testing my reaction. The door opened fully and stayed that way. I stepped back, my mind racing through explanations that did not fit what I was seeing. I did not run because my legs refused to respond, and I did not scream because no sound came out. When it finally stopped, nothing followed, and that made it worse. I told Paul everything that night. He listened without interrupting, nodding like he had been waiting for this moment. He said it had noticed me now, and that once it did, it never let go easily. His voice cracked when he said that, and for the first time, I saw real fear in his face. After that, the apartment changed. Cabinets emptied themselves onto the floor, plates shattering one by one while we stood there unable to move. Lights flickered long enough to make us doubt whether they were about to go out or explode. Paul started sleeping with his door open, saying it was safer to see it coming. The worst escalation happened on a night when neither of us had the energy to argue or pretend anymore. We sat in the living room with the lights on, barely speaking, both aware that the quiet felt loaded. Paul kept glancing toward the hallway as if expecting something to step out. Before the lights went insane, there was pressure in my head and a low electrical hum that made my teeth hurt. The television volume dropped on its own, and the clock reset without warning. Paul told me not to stand up, and I could hear panic breaking through his controlled tone. Every door in the apartment slammed shut, one after another, each impact echoing through the walls. The front door shook violently and Paul started begging, promising anything it wanted if it would just stop. I stayed seated because my body felt heavy and useless. That was when I saw it. A dark figure pressed against the living room window, taller than any person should be, with no visible face or shape beyond a solid black mass. It leaned closer and the glass bent inward as if it might give. I fell backward, hitting the floor hard, unable to look away. When the lights came back, it was gone. Paul was shaking uncontrollably, laughing and crying at the same time, repeating that I finally believed him. I packed a bag that night, but he grabbed my arm and told me it would not let me leave. I spent the night outside, sitting in a library until morning, replaying everything in my head. Paul sent me messages filled with warnings, apologies, and broken sentences. He said it stood in his room and whispered, and that it knew my name. Before I returned, my chest felt tight, and every step toward the apartment felt heavier than the last. I told myself I was just there to get my things, but deep down, I knew something was wrong before I even opened the door. The smell reached me before anything else, sharp and out of place, like it didn't belong inside a home. The apartment was silent, not calm, but arranged as if the quiet itself had been prepared in advance. I called Paul's name once, then again, and moved toward his room, stopping when I noticed a chair lying on its side near the doorway. Before I looked up, I heard a soft creaking sound above me. When I finally raised my eyes, I saw Paul suspended from the ceiling beam. His body wasn't still or straight. His body was twisted unnaturally, his hands tied behind his back. The scene didn't make sense, and the more I looked, the more wrong it felt. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to understand what I was seeing. The room felt tighter the more I looked. The police said that he took his life. They did not listen when I told them about the figure or the doors or the warnings. They wrote it down, thanked me, and left. I did not stay in the apartment another minute. I moved into a dorm surrounded by people, noise, and light, but none of it helped. The same signs followed me, subtle but familiar, always starting small. The doors remained open, objects moved slightly, and electronic devices malfunctioned at the same time every night. Before I accepted it, there was denial. I blamed stress, grief, and lack of sleep. That illusion broke the night I heard footsteps outside my dorm room that stopped exactly where Paul's had stopped before. I went back once during the day to retrieve the last of my belongings. In Paul's old box, I found notes, drawings, and a list of addresses with one name circled at the bottom. Mine. There was no final confrontation, no escape through strength. I left the city and disappeared into another place, hoping distance mattered. I don't talk about Paul, and I don't try to prove anything anymore. At night, I listen carefully not because I want to hear it, but because I know it listens to me. Sometimes there is a soft tap on the window that I pretend not to notice. I am still here because that entity has not decided to finish yet, and that knowledge is the only thing that truly scares me. I know I will be next.
The first night in that room, I understood something was wrong, even before anything actually happened. My name is Marie, and I just started university. New campus, new rules, new people. Everything was new. The dorm room was supposed to be nothing more than a shared box where I slept and changed clothes. I never thought it would become the center of everything. They assigned my roommate at random. Her name was Anne. She was already there when I arrived, sitting on her bed with a book on her lap and her desk perfectly organized. She looked at me and smiled and said hello in a soft, careful voice. Everything about her looked controlled. From the beginning, we were nothing alike. I moved fast, left things around, and treated the room like a place I passed through. Anne treated it like something sacred. She didn't say much that first day, but she watched everything I did, like she was taking notes. At first, the tension stayed hidden behind normal roommate problems. She asked me to clean more. She reminded me about quiet hours. She adjusted things I had just placed somewhere else. I rolled my eyes and ignored most of it. Then she started commenting on my life. She asked why I went out so much, why I came back late, and why I brought boys into the room, even when they never stayed long. Her voice stayed calm, but her words felt sharp. Anne was deeply religious. Every night she knelt by her bed and prayed out loud. She didn't ask if it bothered me. She talked about protection, about sin, about sharing space with someone who walked a dangerous path. I pretended not to listen, but I heard everything. Before the situation turned openly hostile, there was a period where nothing exploded, but everything felt tight. She stopped smiling. She stopped small talk. She started watching the clock and the door. That was when the room stopped feeling neutral. Things changed the day she confronted me directly. She told me that my behavior offended God and that my presence made it hard for her to feel safe. She said she couldn't focus, couldn't sleep, and couldn't pray properly with me there. She didn't shout, but her eyes stayed locked on mine. Before the first real incident, there was a stretch of days where Anne barely left the room. She skipped meals, classes, and stayed at her desk reading religious texts. Every sound I made felt amplified, like I was breaking a rule just by breathing too loudly. One morning, I woke up to her screaming my name. She was standing in the middle of the room holding a photo frame with both hands. The picture of her family had been turned face down on her desk. She kept asking who touched it, over and over, without waiting for an answer. She went straight to housing and asked for a room change. When they denied it, she came back shaking and locked herself in the bathroom. I could hear her crying and praying through the door, begging for forgiveness and protection. That was the first time I felt something close to control. From that day on, Anne treated me like a threat. She checked the door lock repeatedly. She asked me where I'd been every time I entered. She flinched when I moved too fast. The fear in her face became constant, and I noticed how much power that gave me. Before anything else happened, there was always a moment where I could feel her tension filling the room. She moved slowly, spoke quietly, and avoided turning her back on me. That constant alertness made everything heavier, and it pushed me further instead of stopping me. I told myself it was just payback. I said I needed to teach her to stop judging me. I never admitted that I enjoyed seeing her scared, even though I clearly did. Before the first joke, I stood outside the room and listened to her praying inside. Her voice cracked when she spoke, and she asked God to remove the evil influence from her life. That was when I decided exactly what to do. I hung a naked doll from the closet rod while she was in class. When she came back and saw it, she froze in the doorway. She whispered prayers under her breath and backed away slowly, like the thing might move on its own. The next day, I drew a pentagram on the floor with ketchup. She dropped to her knees trying to clean it, crying while scrubbing the stain. She asked me why I was doing this and begged me to stop. I told her she was imagining things. Anne stopped sleeping properly after that. She kept the light on all night. She taped crosses to the walls and lined her desk with religious objects. She refused to be alone in the room with me, but she had nowhere else to go. Before each new prank, I felt a rush building in my chest. I waited for the right moment, watched her routines, and planned where things would hurt the most. The fear on her face became predictable, and that made me bolder. By then, the jokes were no longer harmless. I left taboo dolls outside the door. I scratched symbols into her notebooks. I hid her belongings and watched her panic when she couldn't find them. She stopped eating properly and lost weight fast. Anne confronted me one night, standing by her bed with tears running down her face. She said she was afraid of me. She said something dark followed me everywhere I went, and that I enjoyed hurting her. Her voice shook, but she didn't look away. Before that final night, the room felt unbearable. She prayed nonstop. She whispered verses under her breath, even during the day. Every movement I made her jump, and that constant fear fed something ugly inside of me. That night, I picked up the knife without fully planning to. The room was dark and she was asleep. I stood there for a long time, listening to her breathing, waiting for a reason to stop. I didn't stop. When she woke up and saw the knife, she screamed and tried to get away. I told her I was Lucifer, that she had been right all along. She fought back, but I was faster. I cut her face, tied her hands and feet, and carved the symbol into her skin while she cried and prayed. I didn't stop when she begged. I hit her until she stopped moving. The sound she made stayed in my head long after everything went quiet. Someone heard the noise. Campus security arrived quickly. I didn't run. I dropped the knife and sat on the floor, shaking and breathing too fast. I couldn't look at her. Anne survived, but barely. Her face was scarred, and her body took weeks to recover. She never came back to campus. They arrested me that night. I didn't fight it. I didn't explain myself. There was nothing left to explain. Prison is quieter than my dorm room ever was. My new roommate keeps her distance and watches me carefully. She doesn't talk much. At night, I lie on my bed and think about shared spaces, thin walls, and how easy it is to break someone slowly.
Hey, my name is Andrew. You may not know me, but I'm a recognized chef in my country. I don't want to brag, but I'm really very good. I've been a judge on many reality shows. People know me quite well, not by the name Andrew, but by my stage name, which, for obvious reasons, I would not like you to know. But I'll just tell you this story so you can learn from my mistakes. You see, I was one of the best chefs in the world. As a teenager, I didn't even like to cook. I loved people cooking for me, but I didn't know how to cook at all. That is until one Tuesday night. That night, I decided that I was never again going to go to a restaurant or eat something given to me by someone I didn't know. No, after what I experienced that night, I decided I would be the one to prepare my own food. I told them the story from the beginning. The day had already started out weird. I was in a hurry to meet my girlfriend and go get something to eat together, until a car ran a red light and almost ran me over. I got out of the crash intact, but I fell off my bike, and let me tell you, it was a miracle I didn't hit my head. Before what had happened, the driver got out worried and came running towards me. He appeared to be a middle-aged man, polite, relaxed, and friendly, although I could see on his face that he really felt guilty for having caused an accident. The man checked that I was okay and asked me if I needed anything. He also told me that I was free to write down his license plate and sue him, as it was the right thing to do for what had happened. Laughing, I stood up and told him that it wouldn't be necessary. What had happened was an accident. It could happen to anyone. Grateful, but somewhat confused, the man smiled at me and left, telling me that he was late for work, but that he would be eternally grateful for my generosity. Soon after, I met up with my girlfriend and we started looking for a place to eat. We looked everywhere, but there was nothing new. Everywhere we went, we could find burgers and fries or pizza. We wanted something different. Halfway there, as if sensing our dissatisfaction, a man stopped us and invited us to eat at a fancy restaurant called The Feast. To be honest, I didn't know it, but as it was a hidden and quite exclusive place, we agreed to enter the mysterious black door that the man indicated and went in. As we entered, I immediately noticed the peculiar atmosphere of the place. The dim lights and soft music created a peaceful atmosphere, but something in the air was not quite right. I couldn't put my finger on exactly what it was, but an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. My girlfriend, on the other hand, seemed very calm. She was casually talking to me and telling me that she liked the place. I admit, they gave me some peace of mind, and we were able to get on with the evening. We were seated at a table by the window, and a friendly waiter handed me the menu. There was a wide variety of exquisite dishes, but I decided to go for what I knew I couldn't go wrong. When in doubt, I opted for steak. A safe choice, I thought. As I waited for my food, I looked around. The restaurant was full of people, but everyone seemed to be immersed in their own worlds. There was no laughter or lively conversation, just murmurs and muffled words. I also noticed that there were no people our age. They all looked to be in their 50s and 60s. I decided to just ignore what was going on and started eating. The first bite of steak confirmed my expectations. It was delicious, tender and perfectly cooked. However, as I progressed through my meal, I began to notice something strange. The flavor was becoming more and more intense, almost overwhelming. I tried to remember the last time I enjoyed a meal so much, but something didn't add up. It was then that I noticed that the people around me were looking at me. Their stares were fixed as if they knew something I didn't. I felt uncomfortable, even dirty, but I decided to ignore the stares and finish my dinner. However, the more I ate, the harder I found it to swallow. The taste, once delicious, was becoming bitter and unpleasant. My girlfriend, on the other hand, didn't seem to notice the stares of the people, but she did notice the taste of the food. She was disgusted and enraged, like a person who had just been ripped off. She wanted to make a fuss, go after the chef and not pay for the food. I told her it was not a good idea, that the environment seemed dangerous, and to at least let me finish my meal. I still don't understand why I asked her to do that, but today I can deduce that if I hadn't, my life would be different. Minutes passed, and finally, I decided to stop eating. I looked around and noticed that the atmosphere in the restaurant had changed. The music had stopped, and the murmur of conversation had died down completely. People were still looking at me, but now their faces expressed more than curiosity. They were desperation, anxiety, nerves. Something was wrong with these people, and neither my girlfriend nor I could belong a second longer. Before we left, I got up to go to the bathroom. I needed a moment to recover. As I walked in, I noticed that the room was cold, too cold to be normal. I looked in the mirror and saw my reflection pale and sweaty. My eyes showed a mixture of fear and confusion. I was ready to go back to the kitchen and tell my girlfriend that we were leaving. But before I did, to my surprise, someone grabbed my arm. A man, one of the customers, was next to me, grabbing me. At what moment did he appear? Was he in a cubicle in the bathroom and I was so absorbed in my thoughts that I didn't see him? I asked the man to let go immediately, but he didn't. I would even say he squeezed harder. His eyes were lost in mine. The man was drooling and had a terrifying face, full of perversion and evil. But boy, where are you going in such a hurry? The night has just begun. Disgusted by his words, I tried to hit him, but it was useless. With a sharp blow to the stomach, I fell to the ground, surrendered, and without the possibility to continue fighting. Realizing that I could not defend myself, the man got on all fours and approached me as if I were a dog, sniffing my face, obviously. My only possible reaction to something so bizarre was to cry. I didn't understand what was happening or why it was happening to me. In my moment of confusion, the man threw me to the ground and on top of me began to choke me with his two hands. His gaze was more obsessive and disturbing than ever. It was as if he was in a trance, lost in what he was doing to me. Little by little, I began to lose the fight. I started to run out of air and was resisting less and less until something else happened. From the restaurant, I heard my girlfriend's desperate cry for help. Filled with new energy, I managed to land a knee to the man's private parts and knock him out. In a hurry, I ran to the bathroom door, and when I opened it, looking for my girlfriend, I was shocked at the sight. Everyone in the restaurant went from looking at her to looking at me. They were all standing around, looking obsessive and sickly like the man in the bathroom. They all began to ignore my girlfriend and slowly approached where I was, ready to do who knows what to me. Cornered, I fell against the wall in fear until a man dressed as a chef stepped in the middle. This was the man from before. He almost ran me over with his car. Please, let this one go. I'll make sure you have a replacement for the situation. His voice had changed. He sounded more professional, reserved, and cold. After saying this, people returned to their seats, and he looked at me and my girlfriend, who joined us, still terrified. I hope you will excuse them. These are people from very wealthy circles. They are very intelligent, but once a year, they go with their instincts, and we throw them a special party here. What do you mean? Escorting me out, the man continued speaking. I'm sorry, you have fallen into a little trap of my people. In this place, we do not have the same diet as you. It is a special place for special and distinguished people. I recommend that you do not come here again tonight, as they were waiting for dessert to arrive. Dessert? What are you talking about? I don't understand. Honey, I think he means you. That means that the meat we ate? At that moment, I understood everything. During that night, I had eaten human flesh. And that man who had stopped me in the bathroom, that man wanted to eat me alive. At this realization, I grabbed my girlfriend by the arm and ran away as fast as I could. As I did so, I could see how the waiter simply looked at me with a smile and returned to the restaurant, satisfied. Once we arrived at my house, we considered calling the police, but what was that going to make any sense? It was the statement of two 18-year-olds accusing a place full of millionaires of conspiring to eat human flesh. Instead, we just spent the night puking in my house, considering how close we came to being dessert for some millionaire psychopaths who wanted to eat human flesh for fun. It's been several years since that day. My girlfriend and I are still together, but we don't talk about it anymore. We feel it's reliving a ghost we don't want to remember. Maybe it was the coward's way out. For sure we would have helped many people so that this does not happen to them, but we were afraid to do it, and no one can blame us for that. Since that day, I don't trust anyone anymore. As I told you, I am the one who makes the food. I will never again be willing to eat food that I don't see how it is prepared on the spot. To have eaten human flesh, even once, is more than I will ever be willing to do in my entire life. Fall had always been my favorite season. I don't want to sound old-fashioned, but there's something about the falling leaves and the perfect temperature that I've always loved. In the summer, it's hot. In the winter, it's cold. And in the spring, too hot for my taste. Admittedly, having a house in the woods helped me love fall so much. Every year, my family and I would take long walks in the woods surrounding our house. This year was to be no exception. Nothing indicated that fall was going to end the way it did. It just happened. It all started with a walk. Nothing more normal than that. We walked along the path we already knew. We had walked it hundreds of times. Everything seemed normal until we noticed the old woman. At first, we didn't think anything too strange, just an old woman walking a few meters away from us. She seemed lost. My children looked at her curiously, and my wife suggested that maybe we should help her. Surely her family was looking for her. I decided to approach the old woman to see if she needed help. I told my wife to go on with the children and that I would catch up with them in a moment. I thought maybe she needed guidance or that she had lost her way. I approached her with a smile and asked her if everything was okay. But what happened next was the beginning of the end. The old woman stopped dead in her tracks when I was a few steps away from her. She didn't answer me right away. She just stood there watching me. It was then that she smiled. It was not a friendly smile, not a smile that inspired confidence. It was a weird grimace like she was about to do something bad to me. It's very rare to explain. Definitely one of those things that you have to be there to feel it. But at that moment, I felt fear. I know it doesn't make sense, that she was just a lost old woman, but something in that person's eyes terrified me. Without saying a word, the old woman began to laugh, softly. Her trembling hand went to her jacket and, with a slow, deliberate movement, she opened it. Inside her jacket, hanging by several threads, I saw what appeared to be the heads of several dead birds. The smell emanating from inside was nauseating, a mixture of rot and death that made me instinctively recoil. The old woman was laughing more and more, and I was completely confused, scared and confused. Not knowing what to do, I slowly backed away, trying not to lose my composure. I didn't want my children to see what I had just witnessed. I didn't want my wife to be alarmed. I walked away from the old woman and walked quickly towards them. When I saw them, we kept walking, not saying a word about the old woman. My wife noticed my tense expression, but I decided to lie to her, saying that the old woman had only been talking gibberish and that everything was fine. We left the place quickly, and I thought I would never see the lady again. I was wrong. I started to see that old lady much more often. At first, it was a casual encounter. I would meet her walking near my work. I would see her as I passed by my house or when I was riding my bike. She was just standing on the road watching me as if she knew I was about to pass by. It was true that I had a very routine life, but would an old lady learn my routine perfectly well? I put that idea out of my mind, telling myself that it made no sense. I got even more worried when my children also started to notice something strange. They also saw her walking near the house or the school, but I didn't know how to explain to them what was going on. I told them that she was just an older woman who was probably a little confused and that she was harmless. My son was still scared, but my younger daughter was confident and full of courage. I just wanted them to be calm, and that was my big mistake. They were not supposed to be calm, and a few nights later, I would find out in the worst possible way. That night, as we were preparing dinner, a strange smell began to fill the dining room. At first, it was subtle, but it became unmistakable. A pungent, strong smell like a mixture of rotting garlic and dampness. My wife wrinkled her nose, wondering if I had left something bad in the kitchen, but I knew the source was not in our refrigerator. I decided to investigate, looking for the source of the smell. That's when I noticed the footprints. They were small, barefoot, and marked with mud that extended from the back door to the inside of the house. I began to get very nervous as I noticed how they were heading straight down the hallway that led to the bedrooms. My son was at a friend's house, but my daughter was still in her room, and that terrified me. I grabbed a metal iron I had in the garage, using it as a makeshift weapon. The smell of garlic intensified as I approached my daughter's room. I reached the door to her room and pushed it carefully, and what I saw inside chilled me. The old woman was sitting there on the edge of my daughter's bed. She was whispering something in her ear. My daughter was laying down, but awake. Her toys were on the floor as if whatever she was playing with had been interrupted. She was uncomfortable, but trying not to be afraid and handle the situation on her own. This was my fault. Fury and terror came over me in equal parts. I screamed, ordering her to get away from my daughter. The old woman looked up and stared at me. She laughed out loud and stroked my daughter's hair with her rotten, filthy fingers. She said nothing, just stood there touching my daughter's hair. That's when I lost control. I couldn't contain my rage. I picked up the iron and slammed it against the floor hard, hoping the noise would scare her away. The old woman didn't flinch, just stared at me and feigned an impressed look on her face. She was teasing me. My screams rang through the house, and my wife ran into the room, encountering the scene. She screamed too, asking the old woman to let go of our daughter, that she wouldn't make things worse. Calmer, she took out her cell phone and dialed the police, demanding that someone come immediately. As she spoke to the operator, the old woman slowly stood up, not taking her eyes off me. Her expression had changed. She was no longer smiling. She let go of my daughter and walked past us to leave the room. I thought about grabbing her arm and pulling her out, but as soon as I got close, she held out a small knife.
This was for you. Thank your wife for calling the pigs.
I stopped before I touched her and let her just walk out of our house. When the police arrived, the old woman had already left. The cops tried to look for her, investigated the area, and went all over the road, but found nothing. The old woman probably took another path, going deeper into the forest. A few days after the incident, I tried to get back to normal. I swear I tried. I was still alert, but I needed to distract myself. I decided to go out with some friends for a bike ride, taking advantage of the cool fall air. It was getting dark, but it was still daylight, enough that the road wasn't dangerous. For a moment, I felt good, as if I could put everything that had happened behind me. I remember thinking that maybe it was all over. Maybe the old woman had gotten scared and wasn't coming back. But that tranquility didn't last long. Suddenly, a car came out of nowhere, crossing the lane and hitting us head on. Everything happened so fast that I barely had time to react. I felt the impact, the sharp pain coursing through my body as I flew through the air and landed on the asphalt. After that, I remember only for moments. Everything became confusing. Screams, sirens, the metallic taste of blood in my mouth. And after that, darkness. When I woke up in the hospital, the first thing I knew was that 2 of my friends had not survived. The severity of my injuries was minor compared to the head-on collision they had suffered. At the time, I thought it was all the work of a drunk driver or someone who didn't know how to drive. When I asked the police who had done it, they told me that they had found the culprit. It was an old woman. It was that old woman. In her statement, she claimed that it was an accident and that she had lost control of the vehicle. She didn't count on the fact that a film was recovered where it was clear that it was intentional. I decided to sue her to try to get some kind of justice, and to this day, the lawsuit is still going on. I never understood why that old lady did everything she did to us. I was 10 years old when we moved into that house. It was big, bigger than we were used to. My parents always said it was an amazing opportunity, that we would finally have the space we always wanted. But from day one, something didn't feel right. I didn't know how to explain it. My parents were busy unpacking boxes, and my oldest sister was excited that she would finally have her room. But I couldn't shake a strange feeling. Something about that house was making me nervous. The room I shared with my sister was down the hall on the second floor. The room was across the hall, which was a good thing. Imagine how scary it would be to see the whole hallway. The door was always ajar. I didn't like to see out of the room, but I needed the door half open so some light would come in. It wasn't fear that I felt at first. It was more like discomfort. The first few nights, every time I opened my eyes, I forced myself to close them quickly. Something told me I didn't want to see beyond the darkness of the hallway, but I couldn't help it. And then, one night, I saw it. The light in the hallway began to flicker on and off. It flickered as if someone was fiddling with the switch. It couldn't be my sister. She was sleeping soundly in the bed next to me. I tried to ignore it. I turned over, pulling the covers over my head. It was just a light, I told myself. At that moment, I didn't try to look for logical explanations. I didn't try to deal with it rationally or even scream for my parents. I was only 10 years old. I was terrified and paralyzed. I kept covering my head until at some point I fell asleep. The next morning, I told my sister what had happened. Her reaction was what I expected. She didn't believe me. She laughed and said to me that I had probably dreamt it. She never woke up for anything. She was the heaviest sleeper anyone could imagine. That bothered me, but I tried not to dwell on it. Maybe she was right, and I had imagined it. That night, I woke up again. This time, it wasn't the light that woke me, but a soft sound, as if something was scraping the floor. I sat up in bed, and when I looked out into the hallway, I saw it again. The light was flickering, but now it was flickering slower. On, off, on, off. My eyes wouldn't leave the door, hoping to see someone, one of my parents, or something wrong with the light. Anything that could explain what was happening. I spoke softly to my sister. I whispered her name several times, but she didn't move. I knew she would believe me if I woke her up, but if there was someone on the other side of the door, she would be alerted if she screamed. So I stayed quiet, watching the light continue its slow, disturbing rhythm. I couldn't sleep anymore that night, but when dawn broke, I tried to talk to her again. This time, she didn't even bother to answer me. My mom, when I mentioned to her about the light, told me that maybe there was a malfunction in the electrical system. But it wasn't just the light that bothered me. It was something else, something I didn't know how to explain to them. It wasn't just the lights. Something else was going on in that house. One night, everything intensified. I woke up as usual, but this time, the hallway light was on all the way. It wasn't flickering, it was just on. I stared at it, waiting for something to happen. Nothing. Nothing happened. So I decided that maybe it was time to try to sleep. Maybe whatever was going on was over. Suddenly, I heard a noise next to me, and I opened my eyes again. It was as if someone was breathing. I quickly turned to my sister, thinking maybe she was awake. But no, she was sleeping soundly, as usual. Suddenly, the hallway was filled with darkness. Not because the light had gone out, but because there was a shadow behind the door. I stayed hidden in my sheets for a few seconds until the shadow disappeared. At that very moment, I got out of bed and went to the door to close it. It was dark, but we were safe now. I lay down, trying to calm down,
But that's when I looked at the door and noticed something. The door was open. How could it have happened? I had closed it a second ago. I lay still in bed, turned my back to the door, and closed my eyes as tightly as I could, trying to ignore it, to pretend I didn't care. But then I felt it. Something or someone was next to me. At first, I thought it was my sister, that maybe she had woken up from all the noise I had made and had come to my bed. I spoke to her a little louder, surprised that she had woken up, but suddenly I heard her voice, confused, coming from her bed, away from me. I pulled the sheets off me, scared, expecting to see someone beside me. But there was no one. Fear ran through my body, and just then, something grabbed my foot. I screamed, and my sister woke up immediately, alarmed. She also screamed when she saw me struggling with whatever it was that had me trapped. I tried to break free, but the invisible hand was pulling me forcefully to the edge of the bed. I broke free and got out of bed to hug my sister. She tried to turn on the light, but the lights in the room wouldn't come on. The door had slammed shut, and though we pounded desperately, we couldn't open it. We were stuck there, both of us crying and screaming for help. Suddenly, as we pounded on the door, I saw something that paralyzed me. In the distance, next to my bed, a figure began to materialize. It was not human. She was tall, too tall, and although her body was a black shadow, there was something on her face that I couldn't ignore. Glowing red eyes that watched us without moving. I felt short of breath. I clutched my chest, unable to breathe, and fell to the ground. My sister also fell beside me, choking. At first I thought it was fear, but then I realized that we were both experiencing the same thing. Something was taking the air out of us. I tried to speak, but I couldn't. The pain in my chest intensified. The pain in my chest was intensifying as if something was crushing me. Everything around me began to fade, and before I lost consciousness, the last thing I saw was my parents coming through the door. At first, they were confused and asking us what happened. I looked to the side and the black shadow was gone. My mother was hugging my sister, who seemed to be catching her breath, and my father was making sure I could breathe well. When my father lifted me, I couldn't help but look up. I was up. The shadow from before was above us. My mom looked at my face in surprise and also saw the ceiling. She was as terrified as I was. I screamed that there was something on the ceiling, and my dad almost let go of me from fear. Something was staring at us from above. It could stretch out, it could attack us, but it didn't. It just watched us. My parents pulled us out of the room just in time. I felt them lift me, but everything was blurry. I could barely see, but I knew something had changed when I heard my mom scream. My dad had seen it too, if only for a second. I could tell by the way he held me as if he was as scared as I was. That night, my parents watched the security camera footage. I didn't see them, but I heard his screams. They stayed up late, watching and rewinding the videos. From what they told me, the hallway camera showed something pulling me out of bed, and just before the camera stopped recording, you could see the shadows moving in the hallway. My dad didn't say anything else after that. He didn't mention the lights again. He didn't talk about the shadow being or try to come up with a rational explanation. I knew he felt guilty for not doing something sooner. From that night on, we never slept in that room again. We slept with our parents for a few days until they finally decided that we should move out of the house. We moved into our grandparents' house for a while, and a few months later, my parents sold the house. They bought a much smaller apartment, but no one complained. We just wanted to be away from that place and not think about it anymore. Now it was someone else's problem.
This story is based on the real-life crime of Ana Ayala, a woman who faked finding a human finger in a bowl of chili in a Wendy's restaurant. The case exploded in 2005 and sparked nationwide disgust. Ayala claimed that while eating, she bit into something unusual and pulled out a human finger floating among the beans and meat. Her complaint was dramatic, and for a time, it seemed Wendy's was facing one of the most grotesque food contamination scandals in fast food history. But the entire story was a lie. Investigators found no evidence that the finger came from the restaurant or any of its employees. In fact, the finger had been given to Ayala by an acquaintance who had lost it in an industrial accident at an asphalt plant. She used it as part of a scheme to extort money from Wendy's. For weeks, she maintained the deception in front of cameras and prosecutors, while the company destroyed chili supplies and suffered massive financial losses. What began as a tale of horror turned out to be a twisted hoax. It was around 11:45 p.m. I was doing the final cleanup at the Wendy's on MacArthur Boulevard. I was the night manager, which just meant I had to close the place down, count the drawers, lock everything, and make sure the stoves were cold. The other employees had already left. A couple of them stayed outside chatting at the parking lot, probably killing time before heading home. It had been 3 weeks since the chili finger incident. Corporate had swept it under the rug fast, but I was the one who spotted the lie. I knew the chili came pre-cooked in sealed bags. There was no way a finger could end up in it without someone putting it there. I filed the initial report, told the district manager, and days later, Ana Ayala was arrested. I figured that was the end of it. Turned out, it wasn't. First thing that was weird, the back door wouldn't latch right. I always double-checked it before locking the main entrance. And it looked closed, but it was just barely off the frame. I pushed it hard until I heard it click. Then I checked the cameras like I always did. Everything looked fine. At 12:03 a.m., I went to the break room to grab my keys and head out. That's when I noticed my car from the window. The back windows looked off. I walked out to check. Both tires slashed, deep, clean cuts, no tread left. I scanned the lot. The guys who were outside earlier were gone. My phone was inside on the charger. I didn't hear anything. No footsteps, no voices, no cars, just the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Something about it didn't sit right. This wasn't random vandalism. Someone wanted me stuck. I went back inside to call for a ride, but the second I stepped through the back door, it slammed behind me, hard. The wind couldn't have done that. I didn't hear anyone running. No locker click. Just silence again. I reached for my phone. The charger was empty. I knew I had left it charging right there on the table. It hadn't fallen. It was just gone. I kept my flashlight on my keychain, switched it on, and walked back toward the storage hall behind the kitchen. That's when I noticed it. The walk-in freezer door was wide open. We always kept it shut. I walked over slowly, every step echoing too loud on the tile. The cold air poured over my shoes. Before I got too close, I heard something. Wet breathing, ragged, coming from inside, like someone had run a marathon and couldn't catch their breath. I didn't move. I aimed the flashlight in the freezer. Nothing. Shelves, boxes, cold air. No person, just that breathing. Then the sound came again, but behind me this time. I spun around. Still nothing. But something had changed. The break room door was open. I swear I shut it. I stood still for a second too long. Then I heard something fall behind me. Inside the freezer. A metal tray maybe. Loud, sharp, like it had been shoved off a shelf. A metallic click from somewhere above me. I pointed the flashlight upward. The ceiling vent near the stock shelf was swinging slightly. There was a black smudge on the edge. A shoe print. I bolted for the office, locked the door behind me, tried the landline. Dead. I heard something near the front counter. Then again. A dragging sound. Plastic bags? Shoes sliding? I backed away from the desk, trying not to make a noise. There was a smell, too. Something sour like old meat. I crouched under the desk and stayed there for maybe 10 minutes. The sound stopped. I slowly got up, opened the door, and stepped out. Kitchen was clear. Dining area, too. I kept the flashlight low, hands shaking. I walked to the front. Something felt wrong, like the room was waiting. I saw it on the counter, right where we placed the orders. A finger. Clean, pale, no blood. Perfectly preserved. It hadn't been there before. It looked just like the one from the chili incident. And then I remembered what the cops told us later off the record. Her friend had lost 2 fingers, not one. There was still another one unaccounted for. I stood there frozen. I felt exposed. The store felt too quiet. No humming from the fridge, no buzz from the lights, like everything had shut down without me noticing. I backed up slowly. I didn't hear her enter. I didn't hear anything. I felt it. It hit me like lightning. A shock in my back that made every muscle in my body snap tight. I dropped, twitching on the tile. Couldn't move, couldn't scream, just the sound of plastic on rubber. Someone wearing kitchen gloves. My eyes watered, my jaw locked, my chest tightened. My heart was pounding, but nothing else worked. She walked into view, calm, still in her black hoodie. Thin, older, hair tied back. It was Anna. She looked down at me like she was just deciding how to rearrange furniture. Her face wasn't angry. It was blank, like she had done this before. She didn't speak, just kicked me in the ribs, in the arm. My leg flinched, but I couldn't move it right. She wasn't in a hurry. Another kick. Then she crouched down next to me and pulled something out of her jacket. A small jar. Inside was a finger. Yellow, gray, split at the knuckle, covered in some kind of gel. She uncovered the lid slowly. It was the second finger. This one wasn't preserved. It was old, starting to rot. She grabbed my jaw. I tried to jerk away, but nothing worked. She pushed the finger into my mouth. Then deeper. I gagged, couldn't breathe. My throat seized up. She leaned close. I could smell the latex gloves. I couldn't breathe. She pushed it until I felt it hit my throat. My body gagged, but nothing came out. My vision blurred. I heard a door open somewhere behind her. Voices, loud, real. Someone dropped something. She froze, looked over her shoulder. I couldn't move my eyes, but I heard the footsteps. 2, maybe 3 people coming in fast. One of them shouted. The other ran toward us. I felt her grip loosen. Anna let go and bolted, gone before I could blink. One of the employees, Marcus, grabbed my shoulders and yanked me up. I puked hard. The finger shot out and bounced across the tile. Someone screamed when they saw it. Another started dialing 911. I collapsed against the wall. My throat burned. My arms were still shaking. I couldn't stand up. I remember Marcus kneeling next to me, talking, but I couldn't understand a word. Police showed up quick. We gave statements. The cameras had been disconnected. No prints on the taser. No trace of her. They never found her car. They never found her house. It was like she dissolved into the night. The second finger went to forensics. Matched the same guy from before. The guy who gave her the first one. He had lost 2 in the accident and she kept them both. One to frame Wendy's, one to punish me. She vanished. Nobody's seen her since. I don't close anymore. I got moved to daytime. Still, every now and then, I check my back tires before getting in the car. And I never eat the chili.
How many of you grew up watching horror movies? Ever since I was a kid, all I could do was watch these movies. I always watched movies like Dracula or Jason and Freddy slashers. But aside from those well-known figures, there was something that interested me more. Ghosts. As a kid, I was obsessed with capturing ghosts. I would get into trouble and search for places where it was too dangerous for a child. As a teenager, I kept looking, but little by little, I began to lose faith in it. When I was older, I made a YouTube channel to look for ghosts, but to tell you the truth, it's all lies. I started looking for ghosts, but my videos were too boring because no matter where I went, I never found anything. I got to the point where I stopped believing in the paranormal completely, so I put together my own scares for YouTube videos. But one day, the least expected happened. I finally discovered that ghosts are real. Do you know what else I discovered that day? That you can't play with them. I would have preferred to continue not believing or seeing anything in my whole life, because what I saw that day taught me to be terrified of what awaits us after death. That day, I got a small glimpse of pure evil. It all started in an old movie theater that, to my surprise, was still in operation. The place was just a society of promotion where sometimes they showed movies to their members. My interest in this place arose when I found several videos on the internet where the chairs moved by themselves. The tables fell down and the doors slammed violently. Okay, clearly it was all staged, but I didn't care. The video got enough attention for me to go see what was going on. I talked to the people at the local community association where the movie theater was located, and the response of the people was quite surprising. I knew it was all a lie, but the employees and people I was able to interview were pretty convinced that it was all true. I thought maybe the hoax was just a few and everyone believed it was true. In truth, that's the best way to maintain a lie. Make as few people part of it as possible. The place was private, so I couldn't do much more than ask questions. What the locals didn't know was that I planned to go much further. After asking a few questions, I stayed hidden in the place while they closed it. When it got dark, when there was no one else in the place, I took up my video and photo camera and started to explore the place. I knew nothing was going to happen, so I brought some strings and wires to create the scares on my own. Without fear, I started to walk around the cinema area to see where I could put the wires to create fake scares. I approached the movie theater chair and set up the scares to move them by hand as I left. I also left some glass on top of a piece of furniture to break. Everything was perfectly set up, so I started the performance. I filmed myself walking around the place in the dark. I was prepared to cause the first scare. But instead, the scare came to me. A chair had moved by itself. I recognized that chair. That was the chair I had put the string on. But I had not manipulated it, nor had the string pulled my hand. I was confused. Maybe it was an accident. Anyway, I kept filming, since at least I had captured a totally natural and believable reaction. I paused the video and went to check the thread. It was intact. I was about to start filming again in another part of the theater. But before I started, I heard a noise that made my camera fall over. The door near me gave a terrible bang that sent a roar throughout the movie theater. In this place, there was no wind. Everything was closed, and it even felt suffocating. There was no way that bang could have been a coincidence, and I didn't believe the story that there were ghosts in that place. Someone was with me. Someone was probably guarding the place, and when they saw me, they wanted to continue their little joke and scare me too. Ghosts or not, that place was no longer safe. I couldn't film or do anything if there were people watching my every move. I headed for the exit when I realized something. I was forgetting my camera on the floor. I went back to the movie theater, and that's when I realized that none of this was an elaborate prank. There was no way that what was in front of me was fake. I started to make sure that what I was seeing was real. Sitting in the same chair that had moved by itself, sitting in that chair where I had put a thread, someone, or rather something, was sitting. That thing that was there was not human. It was the most horrifying and creepy being I had ever seen in my life. Its body had a humanoid shape, but was deformed and out of a nightmare. What frightened me the most were its eyes and mouth. Its mouth was full of terrifyingly long teeth, while its eyes, compressed backward, were huge and black and stared at me in a terrifying way, as if obsessed with me. I walked slowly backward, not knowing how I could react to what I was seeing. But the door closed again in front of me. When I looked forward again, the monster was gone, but all the chairs had turned around. They were all facing me. I looked on in disbelief. I remember telling myself that all this had to be a joke. None of it could be real. That paranormal thing didn't exist. Suddenly, the chairs began to move slowly in my direction. All the doors except the one behind me opened and closed violently. I fell to the ground in terror, and when I realized, the monster was in front of me. All he did was stare at me with a huge grin and his eyes completely dilated. I was unable to move. I didn't know if he was doing something to me or if it was just my fear, but I was completely frozen. Aware of this, the monster stuck his 2 fingers in my mouth and started to pull them apart with an enormous superhuman force. With each passing second, I could feel my mouth opening wider and wider. The tissues of my lip were being destroyed and my jaw was breaking. At the same time, he put his other hand on my eyes, where he pressed his fingers very slowly into my eyes, squeezing them tighter and tighter. At that point, I couldn't see anything, but I could feel liquid all over my face, and I could tell it was my blood. On the other side, I could feel a laugh, the laugh of the monster that didn't kill me because it didn't want to, because it seemed to enjoy every second of what I was doing. Ah! And suddenly, it's all over. When I woke up, I realized I was in an alley a few blocks away from the movie theater. When I looked at the time, it was 8 p.m. You know what was the strangest thing? The date was the same, just a few hours earlier. I approached the movie theater again, asking for answers, and the people in charge of the place told me that I had been asking questions, but that I had left an hour ago, as if nothing had happened, as if I had never hidden or spent the night there. But you know, it was all real. Since that day, my jaw has hurt a lot and my eyes burn. There are times when I wake up and vomit dirt, and other times I see shadows where there is nothing. Do you know what the worst part of all this is? It's been 2 years now, and all this is still happening to me. I still don't understand why I am still alive. Maybe that thing didn't want to kill me in that place. Maybe it was a warning, or maybe it enjoyed more the fact that I was being consumed over time, slowly, like a decomposing corpse. Whatever it is, I will live whatever is left of my life without looking for the paranormal. Although I know that sooner or later, the paranormal will find me.
I started working at the Cheesecake Factory in Old Town Pasadena about a year ago. I was a line cook, mostly doing prep and cleaning the grill before closing. It wasn't bad. The pay sucked, but the staff was decent. The only thing that made the place weird was the tunnel under the building. Everyone called it the dungeon. It wasn't part of the restaurant that customers saw. You had to go through a metal door in the back hallway, then down a narrow staircase that smelled like bleach and mold. The managers said it was used for storage decades ago, before the restaurant took over the building, but no one really went down there. The first time I went, it was to grab an old crate of plates. The light flickered nonstop, and the walls were covered in what looked like old grease stains. I could hear something dripping somewhere. The air felt heavy, like the place hadn't been opened in years. I grabbed the crate and got out fast. When I came back up, my coworker Troy asked if I'd heard the kid. I told him no. He said everyone who stayed there late had heard a little girl laughing near the bottom of the stairs. At first, I thought it was bullshit. But after a few nights, I started hearing things too. A metal clang, a faint whisper. Once I swear I heard someone call my name. A few weeks later, after closing, I told my friends about it. We were drinking behind the building and I said there was a tunnel under the restaurant that everyone said was haunted. They laughed at first, but then Greg, who loved all that ghost hunting crap, said we should go down there. I told them it was locked most of the time, but I had a spare key for cleaning shifts. They got excited like idiots. Greg brought his phone to record everything, and his girlfriend, Dana, came too. She said it would make a perfect TikTok video. The last one to join was Luis, another guy from the kitchen. He wasn't into ghosts, but he didn't want to look scared. Before we went in, I hesitated. I remembered how the tunnel sounded at night, how it always felt like someone was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. But I didn't want to look paranoid, so I unlocked the door and turned on the flashlight of my phone. The smell hit us first. It was worse than I remembered, like wet cardboard mixed with rotten meat. Dana gagged. Greg laughed and told her to stop being dramatic. We started walking down. For a few seconds, everything was quiet except our footsteps. Then came the sound, something scraping on the floor somewhere ahead of us. We stopped halfway down the tunnel. The light from the stairway was barely visible behind us. The scraping stopped. Luis whispered that maybe it was a rat, but rats don't make footsteps. We stood still listening. Then, a low voice echoed from the end of the tunnel. Just a single word. Couldn't tell what it said. It sounded like it came from someone with a dry throat. Greg whispered that it must be some speaker system or maybe a homeless guy. Dana wanted to leave. Greg said no, this was the best part. He walked ahead holding his phone high like he was filming a movie. I followed him because the light from his phone was the only one that reached farther in. The deeper we went, the more trash there was. Empty cans, broken boxes, torn blankets. Someone had been living down there. We turned a corner and found a small room. There were 3 mattresses on the floor, all filthy. One of them had bloodstains. On the wall, someone had written with red paint or maybe blood, "No one comes back." Dana freaked out and ran toward the stairs. I yelled at her to wait. Then, something moved behind the mattress. For a moment, I thought it was just a pile of clothes. Then I saw a hand, thin, filthy, trembling. Greg stepped closer and pointed the flashlight at it. A man crawled out slowly. His skin looked gray, his eyes bloodshot. He was barefoot and wearing a torn jacket. He stared at us like an animal trying to decide if we were food. Greg told him we didn't mean any harm. The man tilted his head, then started mumbling something I couldn't understand. Before Greg could say another word, another figure jumped out from behind. This one grabbed Greg's arm and slammed him into the wall. The sound of his skull hitting concrete echoed down the tunnel. I froze. Luis tried to help him, but the second man turned on him and stabbed him with something sharp, maybe a broken piece of metal. I heard Dana screaming somewhere near the stairs. The flashlight rolled across the floor and stopped next to me. I could see Greg's face, his mouth open, eyes blank. I ran. I didn't think, just ran toward the exit. But before I could reach the stairs, a small voice came from behind me. The voice was quiet, but clear. A young girl saying, "Don't leave." I stopped for a second. There, standing near the corner, was a little girl, maybe 8 or 9. Her clothes were filthy, her hair tangled. She looked scared, but her eyes didn't look normal. She wasn't crying. She was staring at me like she knew exactly who I was. I wanted to tell her to come with me, but I couldn't move closer. My body just froze, not from fear, from confusion. Why was she down there? Then I saw someone behind her, the same man who had attacked Greg. He stepped into the light, holding a pipe. The girl didn't even turn around. She just kept staring at me. He said something to her, something about feeding and keeping the noise down. Then he looked at me and smiled. His teeth were cracked and black. I ran up the stairs as fast as I could. I didn't stop, even when I tripped. I didn't look back. When I reached the top, I slammed the door and locked it. I could hear footsteps running below, then a thud, then silence. The police came about 30 minutes later. I told them there were people living under the restaurant, that they had attacked my friends. They didn't believe me until they went down. They came back up, pale as ghosts. They found Greg's and Luis's bodies in that room, along with old cans of food and trash everywhere. But the man and the girl were gone. One officer said that they might have used the service tunnel that connects to another building nearby. They searched for 2 days and found nothing. The door to the tunnel was sealed after that. Management said it was a liability issue. No one mentioned the girl again. I tried to go back to work a week later, but every time I walked past that hallway, I thought I could hear something. Faint metal clanging, footsteps, a soft humming. The police never found the other brother. They said maybe he died down there too, hidden somewhere in the dark. But I knew what I saw. The girl wasn't a ghost. She was alive, and she wasn't trapped. She stayed there because that was her home. I quit a month later. Couldn't stand being in that building anymore. Every time someone mentioned the Cheesecake Factory, I thought of that tunnel, the smell, and the sound of Greg's skull hitting the wall. A few nights ago, I saw a TikTok about the place. Some guy said he worked there now, that he'd heard strange noises coming from under the floor after closing. He even filmed part of the hallway before management told him to stop. In the background, near the bottom of the frame, I could see something move. For a second, the camera caught a small figure standing at the end of the corridor. A little girl in dirty clothes.